This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it's Wednesday, so PMQs will be upon us at 12. Last week's was an anomaly, wasn't it? Because it was the one where everyone thought Angela Rayner was going to keep her head down because of all these ludicrous exaggerations and embellishments regarding something to do with a house she lived in 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So hard to keep up. And instead she came out roaring, absolutely tore Oliver Dowden a new one. So our normal service will be resumed this afternoon at 12 noon. Make sure you tune in for that. And before that, I want to tell you a story, if I may. And it's a story about this job. It's a story about the first time, just listening to Vanessa Feltz talking to Nick there. Well, welcome aboard to Vanessa Feltz, although I'm not sure who she's referring to when she talks about the throbbing heart of the country, or indeed the station. Listening to her talk about the importance of listening to real people talk about real experiences. I think 25 years ago, if I'd heard someone say that on the radio, I'd have thought they were being a bit glib. I'd have thought it sounded a bit gimmicky. But there is one topic that completely changed the way I conduct myself on air. And it is a topic that Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, who I feel has performed pretty well in the job since he got it. I never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. He's certainly not got absolutely everything right, but then who has? But I like the way he's handled quite a lot of potentially very controversial issues. I like the way he has not pandered to right-wing media on some very public and very obvious potential flashpoints. I like the way he sticks up for his force or service, whatever word you may prefer. And I like the way that, I liked the way that we were reminded when listening to a former Community Police Officer of the Year addressing the Police Federation in 2015 after Theresa May accused them all of scaremongering when they were warning what would happen if police numbers were reduced. I liked the way that he was cited by that officer as a good egg, as an exemplary leader, if you like. So I want to get that out there early because I was a little bit dismayed by something that he said to Nick this morning. And before we get there, I'll tell you why the stop and search issue is the one that changed the way I do this job. And I want you to be kind enough, if you would, to have a little think about it. All right? 6 minutes after 10 is the time. Here is the traditional way of presenting a radio phone-in about the stop and search specifically of young black men on suspicion, of which there may be next to none, that they are carrying something illegal. Okay? Here is a succession of elderly white men who have never been stopped and searched in their lives to tell us that they think it's a really good idea. Oh, and hello, here are a couple of white men who have been stopped and searched on occasion and therefore can report that they have absolutely no problem whatsoever with it happening to young black men all the time. Oh, and here is, and this perhaps is the most valid contributor to the conversation out of the three constituencies that I'm describing, here is a black person who has been stopped and searched and is comfortable with the practice as a consequence of their experiences. And every single one of those people completely ignores the experiences of those to whom it has happened many, many times. Many, many times. And that is why it is a subject that changed the way I do this job. Because I came to work one day, and I make of this what you will, but I'd listened to one of those phone-ins that I've just described, a succession of white men, usually quite elderly, opining on how absolutely acceptable and desirable it is to live in a town where young black men are routinely called upon or routinely treated as though they are guilty until they can prove themselves innocent. I just listened to one of those phone-ins and I thought, I find this subject fascinating. I didn't grow up in London. And therefore, it wasn't something that I was particularly conscious of as a kid. It wasn't something I was particularly conscious of growing up or anything like that. But I find it absolutely fascinating for a couple of reasons. One was that I think she was my wife by that point, had been out with a mixed race lad and therefore told me stuff about stop and search, particularly in a car as opposed to on the street, that I struggled to believe. I genuinely, in my naive public school Kidderminster way, couldn't quite believe some of the stuff that she told me was commonplace in her experience when she was dating a mixed race man. That was part of it. And the second part of it was wondering about other subjects in which we would routinely take the testimony and the evidence of people who had absolutely no experience of the process or the procedure under discussion. And you wouldn't like it if it was you, would you? You wouldn't like if it was you. And so I came on air that day and said, I only really want to talk to you today if it's something that's happened to you a lot. I only really want to talk to you today if you are somebody who has essentially been stopped and searched on suspicion of being black. And it changed the way I thought about the subject. It changed the way that we handled the subject. It's only one small corner of the British media. There are still plenty of places where you can see a long queue of elderly white men forming to opine upon a subject that will never, ever affect them, or possibly, with the little exceptions that the two that I mentioned a moment ago, someone to whom it has. Oh, I was a teddy boy in the 1950s and I got stopped and searched twice. I was actually carrying a knife, but that doesn't really matter. I think it's absolutely fine for young black men to be thrown over the bonnet of a police car on a daily basis until they can prove that they're not guilty of anything at all. That's me exaggerating. That's me deploying hyperbole. And it changed the way we do everything. It changed the way that I do not just that subject, but almost every subject under the sun. The prioritization of experience over opinion. Not always. For goodness sake, experts have more opinions than they have experiences sometimes. Studying something, understanding something can be achieved without ever actually having happened to you. But then we took a call during lockdown from a police officer, a policewoman who I will always remember. And she said a phrase to me that I thought was absolutely fantastic. She said to me, everyone likes being policed. Everyone likes the police. Everyone supports the police until they are the ones being policed. Everyone supports the police until they are the ones being policed. Now, can you remember the context in which that conversation took place? This was when people, and I think in the case under discussion, it was middle-aged, middle-class white women, were being arrested or certainly cautioned by the police for drinking a cup of coffee in the park. It's mad to think this was only 3 or 4 years ago, isn't it? The lockdown regulations necessarily introduced quite quickly and in an unprecedented fashion to deal with an unprecedented situation, and therefore introduced quite clumsily, suddenly saw people like me or you or your mum, people who are not young black men, having a tiny, tiny, tiny little taste of what it is like when the police use their powers to demand that you prove your innocence in a completely innocuous scenario, that you can get into trouble with the police simply for being you in a space. Simply for being you in a place. It's the nearest you would ever come, I think, as a middle-class, middle-aged white person to knowing what it would be like to be treated as though you were guilty of something until you could prove your innocence. And I don't think people who I have listened to and read over 20 years or more explaining how much they support the idea of young black men being treated as if they are guilty until they're innocent. I don't think I heard or read a single person who has been historically incredibly supportive of stopping and searching young black men realise that they were publicly complaining about exactly the same practice when it happened to people like them. But some of the numbers that Mark Rowley shared this morning were, at first glance, persuasive. Some of the numbers that we routinely encounter with regard to crime among young black men, and it's easier perhaps to focus upon them being victims, are interesting. I don't think that the numbers cited change the morality or indeed the principles at all. But I have a little respect in the first instance for people who think that they do. If you want to understand why I don't think that we should be paying any attention to ethnicity-specific crime statistics, then you need to look at Glasgow, for example. Well, you need to read Arkala's book, actually, and look at statistics in somewhere like Glasgow at a time when gang violence and indeed knife violence was endemic on the streets of Glasgow among poor white men. So it's got nothing to do with skin colour and everything to do with socioeconomic status. It's a pretty difficult position to step down from. But it occurred to me that I could be hypocritical here, because what if the experiences have changed? What if people's experiences have changed? What if you, as one texter has already said to me, they used to be completely opposed to it, but things are so bad now, we've got to do something. And I can't think of anything else except this, which brings us to the words of Sir Mark Rowley this morning when he said, we're looking at ways to increase our stop and search, and we will make some announcements on that in the next couple of months. He said that the most important thing is that we have to break the culture of people carrying knives. And part of that has to be a fear of being caught. It's clear that there is unfair targeting of black people and members of other minority groups. But there is an argument, and it's not one that I'm making, it's one that I am repeating. There is an argument that that unfairness, that injustice, is a price worth paying for the broader win of reducing the number of knives being carried on the streets of London. And if you see the people most likely to be victims of knife crime on the streets of London, oddly, in demographic terms, the loss and the win will be experienced mostly by the same cohort of people. So you as a young black man are more likely to be subjected to stop and search, but if it succeeds in reducing the number of knives being carried on the streets of London, then you as a young black man are less likely to be a victim of a crime that you're currently more likely to be a victim of than anybody else. It's 16 minutes after 10. I think I got that right. I think that is an uncomplicated account of where I find myself this morning. And I also think that this position here is a beautiful distillation of what I've just tried to what I've just tried to convey. James, just ask a black mother or father whose son or daughter has been stabbed or even murdered what they think about stop and search. I don't think, Mark, you need to then add, or are you scared about what answers you will get? Because I've just spent 15 minutes explaining that although I have convictions and opinions in this space, I don't have experiences, and I'm always more interested in listening to people who do. So, what do you reckon? 2 questions. How did you feel if you were listening to Nick's show, or when you just heard me repeat what the Commissioner said? How did you feel about hearing the most senior police officer in the country call for more of a practice that feels very loaded with 1970s style racism? It doesn't have to be. Perhaps it doesn't have to be. How did you feel when you heard it, and that you've just heard it moving back onto the news agenda? The idea that there will be more of it. We're looking at ways to increase our stop and search. And I want to confine the conversation in the first instance to people to whom it happens a lot, or to people to whose loved ones it happens a lot. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the second question is, can there be a case made for the fundamental unfairness of racial profiling? And I'm yet to hear any explanation of how this practice can be increased or even undertaken without some form of racial profiling. Is there ever any case for arguing that a form of racial profiling is a better or rather is a price worth paying. And remember, it's not me or you necessarily that will be paying that price. It's the people being racially profiled, which is why I only really want to hear from them first, from you first, as someone who would be on the receiving end of this. Is the racial profiling ever an acceptable price for the potential benefits, the potential broader benefits of a reduction in knife possession and therefore knife crime? Give me a call on this, because I'm done now. I've got no other contribution to make. I've set it up, I hope, in a way that will invite calls from people who won't agree with each other, but who will have had a lot more personal experience of this issue than me. Okay? And also people who've been stopped and searched loads and loads of times, and as a consequence consider the police to be their enemy. That was missing from Mark Rowley's comments this morning. The best way, I think, to solve knife crimes or to pursue knife criminals would be to have a police service in which the black community had a lot more trust. And of course, the elephant in the room here is that stop and search routinely and historically destroys trust, destroys the sort of trust that you need in these scenarios. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. All right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I want to confine the conversation in the first instance to people to whom this happens a lot, or to whose loved ones this happens a lot. Okay? Because the rest of us can learn from you.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10, and if you were to include Nick Ferrari, Mark Rowley and me, the only people talking about the stop and search of young black men who are sitting in the studio today are white men of varying degrees of middle age, which I still think is suboptimal, but we do what we can. Adam's in Luton. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. So when I heard the commissioner talking to Nick,
Yes.
I was kind of a bit torn because, again, I have experienced stop and search when I was younger, to be fair. And I did used to have a real bad view of the police, but I do think recently, they are making an effort, like especially the scene of the protesting. They have tried to make an effort to be fair to everybody. However, I only think I will feel comfortable with stop and search when I think the officers either ask the right questions of people reporting a crime, so that when they go out, they're not just looking indiscriminately for black men. And I know for white people, we might all look the same. But for me, I don't say a crime and say a white man. No. And then they go out picking all white people, whether you be ginger, whether you be Spanish, whether you be Whereas I know for a lot of people, we all look the same. But for a black person, I shouldn't. When I've been stopped and searched and I've seen all the black boys that have been stopped on the roadside by me, I don't think that me, who looks like will.i.am, should be next to somebody who's mixed race, next to somebody who's North African, who looks more Arabic. We don't all look the same. So I think they need to be able to differentiate between black people. And I think I'd be willing to give up my right to kind of the freedom of not being stopped and searched. Well, yeah, we spoke about that.
What you've got left of your freedom of movement, Adam, at least freedom of movement in Luton.
But I'm sure black people would be willing to say, okay, well, I'm black and I know that statistically I'm more likely to be committing this crime, so you can stop me.
But the statistics the other way round are you're black and you are statistically a hell of a lot more likely not to be a knife criminal than you are to be a knife criminal, and yet the whole policy is predicated upon the idea. Well, listen, I'll tell you, I don't know if you're familiar with Akala's work, are you? Have you read Natives? Yeah, I thought you might be.
I like him. He's Dynamite's brother.
That's the fellas. But here's his line, which I always find... Yeah, stop it now. We're having a serious conversation, honestly. If I'm a 15-year-old and I'm in such a low place emotionally that I'm willing to kill someone over what council estate they're from, do you really think that the threat of 10 years in jail is going to stop me? It's the stupidest argument in the world. Yeah. Because do you know what actually stops people from feeling that way? A good education, a good job, a bright future.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But I don't think we're even ready for that level of nuance yet. And so truthfully, I do think if either that person will say, yeah, you can stop and search me indiscriminately, and an Asian person will say, you can stop and search me because I'm proportionately more likely to do terrorism by your own statistics, then white men should be indiscriminately stopped for maybe particularly white men between 30. Exactly. And then we could all be treated equally, and then we can't all complain.
Are
as
you
long
being
as we going through your laptop and say, you need to look at yours, then you can check my pockets.
As a white man, you are statistically more likely to be engaged in child sexual abuse than any other part of the society. So, Adam, we don't need to see your laptop, but James, if you could just give me your passwords now. You're being a bit mischievous. I should. Is a lesson for me here. Hang on, I should
treat everybody like black people. Let's treat us all equally.
Yes, you are being mischievous, aren't you?
No, I agree.
No, you are being mischievous. It's a very, very powerful point, and I wish I had interrupted you less, which I very rarely say out loud on the radio, although I think it quite often. I wish I'd interrupted you less, because then the power of the point you're making might have been better conveyed. But what you're saying is, if you're comfortable with this as a white person, then give me all your passwords, because I'm going through your laptop on the perfectly reasonable statistical grounds that you're more likely to be a child abuser than I am.
And I can't play the race card because we're all being treated exactly the same.
Oh, there you go. 26 minutes after 10. Jason's in Lewisham. Jason, what would you like to say?
How you doing? I agree partly with what he says, but with the stop and search, for me, it's more of how many times have I been told that I match the description of someone?
Yeah.
So I should be stopped. And it's harder for us when Section 60 gets invoked, because that means they can just search anyone they see.
Yeah.
And I've been searched. I'm a 40-year-old black guy. When I was younger, there was a point where I got searched every week. I can come from training. I was searched for a while. I was walking my dog. And the reason was used is that dogs have been used for robberies.
Right.
And for me, stop and search is fine. I understand, but it's the approach. So I can give you an example where I could be walking, and then they would pull up beside you. About 6 or 7 police officers would jump out, surround you, and that would instantly put you on edge if you're being surrounded.
Yes.
In certain cases, they would detain you because they fear for their safety, and then from that's where half the searches go south.
Can you imagine a world in which you would be stopped and searched a lot more often than me, but that you wouldn't mind?
No, it's mostly approach. If they approach you,
but that's why I'm asking you the question that I'm asking you, Jason. Because if the approach was different, what would that approach be then? What would the approach be in the world in which you would be less bothered, or ideally not bothered at all, by the unfairness of you being treated differently from me because you are black and I am white?
From the way they exit their vehicles. Like, they will exit the vehicles in a rush. The way they surround you. Instead of, excuse me, so at the present minute, can we have a word? There's been incidents. Explain what you're doing. Don't explain to us why we're in cuffs or why you surrounded us, because that explanation's already gone.
But if I'm a policeman and I'm genuinely under the misapprehension that you might be a violent criminal, then the softly approach would put me in danger.
It would, but you got to put your numbers with you, because I've never been stopped by a single police officer. I've always stopped by 6 or 7 police officers. So numbers have always been on their side. So if they can softly, you put it softly, but it's more, there's 6 police officers in front of me, and one of them's, because if you ask anyone that's been stopped, there's always one police officer that interacts with you in a respectful way.
Right.
And then if that happened at the beginning, then I'll be really like, look, I've done nothing wrong. I've got nothing on me. You've got a job to do. You do your job. I can be on my way. But it doesn't happen like that. That on hindsight, it happens of, we need to search you, get here, and then we're on edge.
And you bring me towards the second point that I always find very powerful in this conversation, which is that it is a policy that doesn't distinguish between Trevor McDonald and a genuine criminal. It is simply because you're a black guy that you are going to be treated in this way, and that puts the vast majority of black people, and I'm quoting Akala again because I think he's a genius, in a tremendous amount of danger. Jason, thank you. 10:30 is the time. I'm in good faith, but with a little bit of scepticism. I'm trying to find the ground on which Mark Rowley's pronouncement today shouldn't cause as much concern as it has done in some quarters. And the idea that more stop and search isn't necessarily bad news for all black people. And I think we've succeeded. I think Jason was nudging us in that direction, even if Adam's very mischievous but powerful point was setting our our compass in the opposite way. It is 10:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen to this, if you would, from Danny. And the first line nearly put me off in a way, but luckily I'm not as quick off the mark as I used to be. So James, you can take black. In fact, you have to take black out of the conversation and concentrate on postcode. Now, this is actually what Akala also argues. He says, I'm a 50-year-old white man. I grew up on the Highfields estate in Felton, that's in Hounslow. There wasn't a large black community when I was 20 years old, but we were stopped and searched for drugs a lot, not knives. I was stopped and dragged by the SPG in the back of a van, stripped, searched loads and loads of times. We'd spot them from miles away. As soon as they touched, we would run. If we were clean, we'd just be gone. But this was because of the postcode I lived in, being a drug hotspot, and getting searched was par for the course. I'd rather 100 innocent men were searched than one die. Who Danny's now a window cleaner living in Devon. Unfortunately, it's not a postcode, you see. It's usually a street. You focus in on the really tight nuclei of activity. Malcolm Gladwell writes about this, and you can make progress. But what you don't address by going in on postcodes is Akala's point about treating and he uses the example of a journalist, because in the interview I'm looking at today, he was obviously talking to a journalist. I threw Sir Trevor MacDonald into the mix. But what is completely absurd is the idea that it doesn't make a difference to stop and search in this context, whether a black guy is a professional journalist or in jail for double murder. It is simply saying it is because you're black that we think you should be treated in this way. And Jen in Romford says, I know for a fact that if all our white kids were killing each other with knives, we'd be demanding that the police search our kids. Yes, except you wouldn't, Jen, because during lockdown, when white people were treated as if they were guilty until they could prove that they were innocent, every right-wing newspaper columnist and hothead in the country was absolutely outraged. Here's the thing. Everybody likes the police until they are the ones being policed. And people who are not policed in this way are always a lot more enthusiastic about the policy than people who are policed in this way, which suggests to me it's an unhelpful policy. But it doesn't mean I'm right. Olamide is in Deptford. Olamide, what would you like to say?
Well, I think stop and search is very important, considering the level of crime going on in the city at the moment.
Yes.
But what I would like to say is the approach is very, very also important. The police needs to do their job very well.
But what is the acceptable approach? You're more likely to be stopped and searched than I am. We are both as pure as the driven snow in terms of criminality. Neither of us are ever going to be carrying a knife or carrying drugs or any of those things. You're going to face this a lot more often than I am. What is the way in which it can be done to you that doesn't feel unfair?
Well, can I share my experience with the police that
Yes.
I ever had with you? So probably you understand where I'm coming from.
Okay.
A couple of years back, I was stopped on Blackfriars Road in Oakham Road. I was coming from church. I was in suit. I was in smart, the best way I could be.
Yeah.
And I was asked I just saw an unmarked car behind me, and they pointed a gun at me while I was still driving, asking me to park.
Wow.
So I parked my car, raised my hands up. They drove my car and parked it properly. The gun was still being pointed at me. And I asked the officer, what was the offense? Immediately, they handcuffed me. They said they want to stop and search me. And also, they suspected I was carrying a gun.
Yeah.
I said, I've never seen a gun in my lifetime except this one you are pointing at me. I've never seen a live gun in my entire life. They never believed me. I was literally shaking. And they searched my car. They did it more. In fact, they opened my engine. They opened my air cleaner box. They did all kind of things for about 45 minutes. While they were doing all of this, I was still being handcuffed beside the roads. I was highly embarrassed as a black man.
Of course you were.
So at the end of the day, nothing was found. I was given a kind of reference. The police officer said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a car mechanic. I work in Deptford. I work in Oakham Road. He said, wait a minute. He described where I worked. I said, that's where I work. He said, oh, sorry, it's a mistaken of identity. I think I know you. Then I realized, the moment he said, I think I know you, I realized he's a police within the community. And then he said something. He said, are you able to drive home? Then I live in Stockwell. I said, I will manage to drive home. He said, if you can, I will help you to drive your car home. I said, don't worry, I will drive home, because I can't even trust you now to drive my car home. It was a nasty experience.
Nasty doesn't come close. So what? Well, this is my problem now. I'm moving on a little bit because there's so many people waiting to talk, but I don't want you to feel hurried. But how could that have been done in a way that left you thinking that it was okay?
So I questioned him. I said, how did we come to this place that you have to embarrass me this way? Was it because I'm a black man? Or the man said, well, we're doing our job and we understand that this must have been a mistaking of identity. But if you want to prosecute us, we can give you a reference for this, so you can't. I can't be bothered. No. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I can't be bothered. Number one is, from then on, I don't trust the police. And I've got to say this. Because
forever?
I wouldn't say forever, but I can't, because I won't say forever, because obviously police are there to protect each and every one of us on the street and make sure the state is safe. But of course, they have to do their job right. I know they're in a difficult situation finding out the criminals as to the right people on the street, but they still have to. Take, for instance, if I had been shot without mistaking of identity, what would the police say after my death? It was
but you rang me to tell me that you thought it could be a good thing if it was done differently.
Obviously, there must have been one or two things that must have led to their investigation asking me to stop, but not by pointing a gun at me.
Yeah, but if the thing that led to the investigation was the fear that another black man who doesn't look anything like you might have a gun on him, they have to point a gun at you in case you've got one in your glove compartment, they would say. So what? I don't know whether you realise that when you rang in, you essentially said to me that you want to live in a country where people are treated differently by the police on account of their skin colour, as long as they do it nicely.
I am not. To be honest with you, I am not a discriminating person. I don't mind. I don't care whoever police are stopping, whether white or black. I don't want to raise that issue. I do not say because I'm a black. I just want police to do their job professionally. Because look at the way I was harassed. Because that is the difference between me being alive and being dead, was that the police officer did not pull his trigger. If he had done at that point,
well, exactly.
I wouldn't be here talking to you.
But I will almost certainly never find myself in that situation.
How would you feel in my state, Mr. Nick? How would you feel in my state at that point that a live gun was pointed at me with a pretense of I'm having a gun in my car?
No, I'm not making light of it. I think,
and it wasn't just one officer. There were about 4 of them.
Yeah. So how can you ring me and say I'm okay with stop and search as long as they do it nicely?
So, it's not every officer
that has to have a gun. What does nicely look like, though, is the thing I'm confused by.
Well, if they ask me to park and I refuse to park, because the law is, if a policeman stops you, you have to respect the law.
I'm gonna push you a bit, Olamide. You're not answering my question. How could that have been handled in a way that you wouldn't have been upset by?
Good. If I was asked to stop...
Yeah, but they think you've got a gun, so they're not going to say, hello, potential gunman, would you mind awfully pulling over? The problem is that the whole conversation is premised upon the acceptance of the idea that it's okay for this to happen to you because you're black. And I can't say that as a white man, I can't say, and somehow people have becoming conditioned to think, oh no, if they were polite, it would be okay. You can't get past the central point, which is, here are 2 people, here are the police service who are policing by consent to protect all of us, but they're going to treat these 2 people differently because of the colour of their skin. So you can say to me, I'm okay with that as someone who's on the wrong end of it, but what you can't say to me is what it would look like. Because you can't do it politely if they think that if they genuinely think that you're likely to shoot them. And of course they can't prove that it is genuinely likely, or even that they genuinely believe that. They just have to say that they do in order to justify the use of the force that you describe. Cameron is in Lewisham. Cameron, what would you like to say?
James, I think the conclusion that you've kind of just got to there is the one. This is an exercise rooted in hearts and minds. As a black man, as a trained and qualified accountant, I've had a gazillion times that I've been stopped. And when they start asking me who I am, what's your job, and I say that I'm a qualified senior accountant, all of a sudden the difference with which, in the way that they deal with me, is tangible, James.
But that only happens after you've been stopped. So you've already got the indignity of being stopped on countless occasions, directly as a consequence of the colour of your skin.
100%, James. But the problem is, they need to just be kind and not treat me like I'm a douchebag, right?
The phone line's gone. Come back. Sort your phone line out. I want to hear this.
If that's the way in which they greet me and treat me like...
No, I can't do it. You have to try. I don't know what happened then. It sounds like he fell down a well. I do hope not. And that's the bit I'm hearing it, and I can't be impatient with my own failure to get a proper grasp on what the polite... Well, okay, you could just say, well, they treat me like they would have treated you, which in Cameron's case, I can get my head around, possibly, albeit that I've never been stopped and searched. But in Olamude's case, there's no way I don't think you can pull someone over in their car because you think they've got a gun in a polite fashion. I don't know that being pulled over because you're black in that case, but the robust, shall we say, behaviour of the police, I perhaps naively think would be the same regardless of who was in the car if the police honestly believed there might have been a gun in there. Oh, flipping heck. It's coming up to 10:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation will shortly continue. PMQs, of course, are on the way at 12. I've got a slightly different unhinged headline for you today from an old friend of the show. I use the word incredibly advisedly, and I think we're going to get a first-hand report on what is going on with regard to those new checks. Do you know that here's a thing that's going to shock you. I'm going to read you a headline, and then I'm going to ask you a question. And I will answer the question when we get back from the next break. And the headline involves the conversation that we were having yesterday, a conversation that lasted for 2 hours in the end. Here's the headline. Brits face higher grocery bills as retailers warn post-Brexit border checks coming into force today mean they will have to put up the price of food imported from the EU. Now, I grant you that as far as I can tell, that's only appeared in the online edition, but I could be wrong about that. Brits face higher grocery bills as retailers warn post-Brexit border checks coming into force today. What is the least likely newspaper that you would expect to see that headline in? Because if you guess the least likely, you've almost certainly got it right.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time, so some more breaking news for you. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested for attempted murder after 3 people were injured at a school in Sheffield. Officers were called to Burley Community College on Burley Lane at about 10 to 9 this morning after reports of an incident involving a sharp object. A child was given medical attention after being assaulted, and 2 adults were also injured. As I say, a 17-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and remains in police custody. A timely reminder, indeed, of the seriousness of the conversation that we're having, and also perhaps a timely moment to wish the absolute best to the 2 officers injured in yesterday's attack in Hainault, about whom Mark Rowley spoke very powerfully and quite disturbingly, because the nature of these injuries has become clear in the last 24 hours. Earlier today on LBC with Nick Ferrari, I got Cameron back on a decent line because we were going somewhere nice, or nice, not nice, but interesting. So you think, Cameron, that you can now tell me the circumstances in which you being stopped a lot and me being stopped never wouldn't bother you that much because the police were behaving differently?
Would bother me less, James.
Okay.
And that's critical. We're never going to trend this down to zero. There is a problem endemic within the police force that sensible, rational-minded black people and people of colour are always going to be aware of, right? But we're trying to minimise the problem. And the way that you do that, again, at the outset, this is a hearts and minds activity. You've nailed it, James, by the way that you've engaged this topic meaningfully by saying, I want to talk to people who are most affected by it. It's a brilliant example, and it's a brilliant case in point. Understanding and with care and with a bit of humanity, that's exactly, in my experience, what the police lack in the way that they deal. I've never committed a crime in my life, James, but I give you the example that I gave you at the outset. I'm a SEMA qualified accountant. Knowing that piece of information shouldn't change the way in which you treat or talk to me or handle.
They should be on that respectful place before they find out what your professional status is. It should be your citizenship, your humanity, your just your existence that deserves respect. Let me read you something though. I'm all over Akala again today. I just think he's such a thoughtful and powerful thinker, and he cites something that is called the Transformative Violence Reduction Unit in Glasgow, the VRU. Where they look at school mentorship, employment opportunities, community initiatives, a city that was and is, I think, or was at the time, much more violent than London. And it was successful. Carla says, Glasgow has seen a massive reduction in violent youth crime, even though the city itself is more violent than London. If poverty, domestic abuse and expulsion from school give us the strongest common indicators for knife violence, rather than blackness, then what should we be working to change? It's not rocket science. And now I'm going to play. And now I'm going to play you what Mark Rowley said earlier today. And I think that these two positions are at odds with each other.
I think the most powerful thing about Stop and Search, there's lots of contentious views in communities, and particularly it's particularly sad in black communities who are the greatest victim of knife crime. A statistic you'll have heard me mention before, probably. Young black men in London growing up are 13 times more likely to be murdered than young white men. 13 times. That's horrific. We need to come together to solve that problem. Part of the answer is Stop and Search, done properly and fairly and compassionately by police. And the thing that's most powerful is mothers who've lost their sons always say, why can't the police do Stop and Search? That's why we have to do it. We have to find a way to do it compassionately with the support of communities, and you'll hear more of that in the next couple of months. See,
that's powerful, but it is at odds with what Akala says. He says, focus on these other issues, which are bigger indicators for knife violence, rather than blackness. And Mark Rowley, I think clearly, is saying focus on blackness. So who's right?
Oh, James. Bloody Nora. Listen, Akala's right. And if I boil down what Akala's saying in a nutshell, this is not a racial problem. This is an economic, a social and an economic issue. And we shouldn't confuse the two if we wish to address them with the urgency and the robust processes that they deserve. And this is me talking as a victim, not a victim. See, look at what I'm doing there. James, you hear the paranoia seep in.
Yes, I do, yeah. Well, I think you are a victim. And that might be my, I don't know, white saviour syndrome or whatever it's called. Because if what happens to you happened to me, I would feel aggrieved. I would feel victimised.
James, I'll give you a quick example to close.
Yeah.
I passed my driving test at 17 years old. And I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian area in Birmingham called Sutton Coldfield.
Yeah, I know it well.
Coming back from a nightclub, I went to see a friend. Like, it wasn't that late, probably about 11:30, maybe midnight. And I dropped a friend off back to his house. And we stopped in the car talking for about 20, 30 minutes. And I lived literally 2 minutes away from that friend, again, Sutton Coldfield, Warmley to be specific. When I drove out from my friend's road, a cul-de-sac, I was greeted by 4 police vehicles, 2 of which were vans, pulled over, yanked out the car, thrown against my car. And it was all so aggressive. I've never been so petrified and scared. And that stayed with me. That was like 20 years ago now. And that stayed with me. Just the way in which they dealt with me, as if I was like the worst kind of criminal.
Of course it did.
James. And that's the way. That's exactly what police don't need to be doing. Don't disenfranchise the community. Try and bring the community in and make us work to solve together, collaboratively, to try and solve for this circumstance, because it can't be us and them, James.
But then we need, and that's why Mark Rowley's words were so interesting, because he sounds like he understands that, but I don't think anyone yet has really got close to describing the behaviour that you would like to be on the receiving end of as preferable to what you're currently on the receiving end of, and he believes he is capable of introducing. I thank you, mate. I'm glad we got you back on. But how old are you, Cameron?
Mate, you're asking the exam questions.
Ballpark.
I will be 40 this year, mate.
So it wasn't Pagoda Park that you were on your way back from then?
No.
just checking. It's 10:56. Roy's in Uxbridge. Roy, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, James.
Hello, Roy.
How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm very well. What's on your mind?
Well, I actually inherited LBC from my mum, yeah? So it's the very first time I'm calling, so excuse me. I've never done this before.
You're very welcome. Yeah? And thanks to your mum as well.
Well, she's now a dementia sufferer, unfortunately. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that's just life, yeah. I mean, I'm 61 years old. I'll do this really quick. I'm 61 years old. Yeah, I'm black. My parents were Jamaican, and so I'm the first generation in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the conversation I listened to on LBC, a lot of people don't understand. What you're talking about is normal. I was brought up in Harlesden, Northwest 10.
Yes.
Yeah? This is normal. So when people are talking about their outrage, nobody wants to be stopped. Whether you're black, white, Indian, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
Nobody wants to be stopped and intimidated. But one thing I learned later on in my life, yeah?
Yeah.
You can't deal with a problem that's open-ended and sit down and talk about it all day long. You're never going to solve it. Yeah? You've got to deal with the root causation. Yeah? What has brought it up to this? In the 70s, I got done for sus at 15. They followed me down Oxford Street all the way to Tottenham Court Road, and me and my pal got marched to the police station and got arrested for sus. For what? For jumping off the bus and jumping on another bus.
Yeah.
So this is something, and this is the biggest joke. There wasn't no black police then. Yeah? There weren't no black police. Every policeman was white. Yeah?
Yes.
Now, in the 80s, they had this massive campaign to bring in ethnic minorities into the police force. They had that massive swoop. The problem's still there. So the problem we need to look at is, why have they got to be doing this stop and search? Something's going dramatically wrong.
Yeah. And it was wrong in the 70s, and it's wrong in the 80s, and it's wrong now.
It's wrong now.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. Now, I listened to your two just before I came on. I listened to the two suggestions of what their opinions were. They've both got a point. Yeah. But let me tell you this straight.
Go on.
The only way you're going to deal with this now, it's not a black problem anymore. Yeah? It was a black problem. It's now a multicultural.
It's a society. It's a social problem.
Yeah, you can't tell my 15-year-old grandkids or whatever, listen, you know what, slavery and do you ever watch Roots, and this is what the white people done to us. He's going to say, what are you talking about? Yeah, my pal's Polish, and my best pal comes from Somalia.
I see.
So,
yes, I understand what you're telling me. That society is not divided in the way that it was when stop and search became both a byword for policing and a thing.
Correct.
And I hadn't thought of it that way around. And we're gonna run out of time, but I want to push you to something. Just wait. Paul makes a point. You heard those two quotes. You heard me quote Akala, and you heard me play the clip of Mark Rowley. Paul suggests that Akala is talking about dealing with the root causes of knife crime, which is what you addressed. Well, the commissioner is talking about reducing the knife crime resulting from those root causes. Could they both be right?
They are both right.
Interesting. But that means that we're back to this, I don't want to say mythical, but we're back to this idealized idea of you as a black man, your grandson as a black boy, being stopped and searched a lot more than people like me, but in a way that doesn't foment grievance and unhappiness. And I don't know that I still, an hour into this conversation, I still don't know what that policing would look like, Roy.
It's very, very difficult. They've got a very difficult job. But before I I'll say very quickly,
go on.
I was a cub. I was a scout.
Yeah.
I was in the Air Cadets. Yeah. I came from a different regime. Tell these kids that now. You got to be joking.
Yeah, so we're going down the a little bit more discipline, a little bit more good behaviour. I mean, I was in the Air Cadets, mate. I got expelled from school for involvement with cannabis. So it's not necessarily a guarantee, but of course, being a white bloke, it didn't ruin my life. It is 11 o'clock. Thank you, Roy. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. And we move next into territory where the police are very much playing catch up. I'm going to tell you a story that has been haunting me for weeks. And it's a story that when it was shared with me, I it contained several gaps. And the gaps were there for everybody. They were there for the family to which this happened. And they were there for the people, mutual friends, who told me the story. And the gaps were then there for me. And then something happened this week that filled in the gaps. But I'm warning you now, this is a conversation about something that has become known as sextortion. A warning from police this week. Schools being warned that pupils are being targeted for nude images by criminals for the purposes of blackmail. As in, that's what I'm warning you about. So it might be triggering, or it might be something that you can't stomach. So, and I need to be a little bit discreet because it's I don't need to be a little bit discreet because the details will be happening in different families and different schools up and down the country. But I was told this story by someone I used to work with, actually, someone who used to work here, and it involves someone else that we both know. And there's a 12-year-old girl whose parents were splitting up, and who became caught up in circumstances that her mum and dad were utterly unaware of. And it culminated when a significant sum of money went missing from the house, went missing from the home just before Christmas. Now, I have to tell you that this young woman, this little girl, was what we would have called when I was a kid very square. She wasn't in a hurry to grow up. She wasn't, vaping at the bus stop or anything like that. She was a studious, shy, well-behaved schoolgirl. And when the money went missing, the parents, who, as I've said, were in the process of breaking up themselves, didn't think for a moment that it could have been their daughter that had taken the money, but it emerged that it was. And it emerged that she was giving the money to people who had made her very, very frightened. And then it emerged that these people were in possession of photographs of her that were, I'm afraid I'm going to use the word explicit. Now, these are the gaps, all right? Nobody knew when this story was shared with me just before Christmas. Nobody knew in the entire network, including the school, which was brought into the incident, and the police. But nobody knew at that point the circumstances in which she had taken and sent those photographs, because she was traumatized and she was incapable of talking about it. She was so frightened. I can tell you now that she's in a better place, both geographically and emotionally, but I do not know how long it takes for this stuff to work through the cell. I don't even know what words to use. So what had happened was that she had been groomed in ways we did not understand, they did not understand, into doing this thing, taking these photographs, putting them in the hands of people that were clearly not to be trusted. Although, again, details missing. I don't know whether she did trust them when she did it, or whether she was already acting under duress when it happened. The gaps got filled in this week for me. I haven't spoken to any of the other people involved yet. The gaps got filled in for me this week when I started reading about the National Crime Agency's alert to teachers, urging them to raise awareness of sextortion among their pupils. And like you probably, I thought that this would be a paedophilic crime. I thought this would be child sexual abuse for sick gratification, whereas in fact the organised crime element of it has as much to do with the missing money, the missing 500 quid, as it does with the photographs, the explicit photographs. And other elements that contributed to the gaps that I'm describing to you include everybody thinking that she was doing homework club at school for an hour or for half an hour before school every morning, but it turned out that actually she wasn't. And it was, when I was told this story, still wasn't known what she was doing in these windows of time, but money was at the absolute heart of the offence. And almost all of these gaps, with one unexpected side effect, if you like, side issue, almost all of these gaps were filled in for me earlier this week when I started reading about boys like Dinal de Alwis from Croydon in South London, who died by suicide in October of 2022 after receiving threatening messages from an anonymous blackmailer, and Murray Dowie, same age, a schoolboy from Dunblane in Perthshire, who was tricked into a sextortion scam by a blackmailer posing as a young girl. The unexpected side effect or side issue is that this is as likely or more likely to happen to school boys as it is to school girls. So in the case of Murray, someone pretending to be a teenage girl, someone pretending to be his age, starts flirting with him online, possibly even sends him, I don't know the details, so this is speculation from me, sends him some photographs, explicit photographs, and asks for some in return. And when he sends them in return, they reveal their real identity and say, if you do not give me money, or if you do not send me more photographs of you in, this is where the CSA angle comes in, if you don't send me more photographs of you doing things, other things, then I will send these to your mum, or I will send these to your mates, or I'll put them up on the notice board at school, or I'll post them on Facebook, TikTok, WhatsApp, all of it, Snapchat. And I feel sick talking to you about this because of the way in which the news this week involving the National Crime Agency's alert to teachers and the story, the reality that I was made aware of before Christmas, and then the completeness with which the news has filled in the gaps in that story has really actually disturbed me this week. It now makes sense. I now think I know pretty much what was going on in that poor girl's life. I can't begin to think how you help her back to normality, but that process is, in this case, underway. So we need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. And, of course, the only way that we can talk about it is if it has happened in your life. And you can fill in the gaps that remain on how this happens, how it happens. And you do that by telling us how it happened. Past tense, 0345 60973 is the number that you need. I need to check the bottom. Please don't read out my name. If you read this out, I won't. My 13-year-old niece, writes this listener, was a victim of sextortion, groomed by an adult male who she believed to be a young girl her own age. They even had mutual Facebook friends. We only discovered this as a family when she attempted suicide. It turns out the person responsible did know her and was a football coach for a kids team and had done the same to others in the team. He got an 8-year prison sentence. And that element, this is what I mean, and I hope the language is appropriate. This is what I mean about the filling in the gaps. So that was a child sexual abuse motivation. That was, sick sexual gratification rather than money being the motive. But the tactics will be exactly the same. Pretending to be a young girl, pretending to be a girl of the same age, and tempting, defrauding her into sharing intimate photographs. So how does it happen? How does it work? And I want you to know something. I want you to know, if you are thinking of ringing me and talking to us about this, there are two reasons to do it. Number one is to help other people falling into the same horrors that you or your loved ones have experienced. That's a big part of it. But the second element of the conversation is that knowledge is power. Getting it out there. Getting it out there in a way that makes the people to whom it's happened feel less shame, if you will, because it could happen to anyone. Do you see what I mean? And this is what I really want to drive home about the story that I shared with you from my personal life. It really could happen to anyone. It really could happen. I know that as parents we like to think that we are doing a better job, is probably cruel language, but we're across. It couldn't happen in our house because we talk about things and we do this and we do. I think it could happen to anyone. I really do. And I want to know how it happened to you. 0345 6060 973. And I also want to know, this is why I suggested earlier that the police and the schools and of course the parents will be playing catch up, but I also want to know who helps, what the system does when you find yourself in this nightmare, when you find yourself in this hell. All right? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 11 is the time, and I something I wasn't expecting to happen, and I probably should have seen coming, given that the case studies cited today by the National Crime Agency both involve 16-year-old boys, but just glancing at my switchboard, which I kind of hope doesn't light up. You don't want to think that this is happening in loads of families up and down the country, but it clearly is, given the warning issued by the National Crime Agency. It seems more likely to happen to boys than to girls. There is some advice offered up by an expert writing in the Times newspaper today, which we will definitely get to as well. 19 after 11 is the time. Anna is in Bristol. Anna, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I'm ringing because I wanted to try and put an alert out for parents of something that happened to my son.
Go on.
So my son is an adult but lives with me, and he has autism. He is working.
Yes.
He was contacted. He does a lot of gaming.
Okay.
And there is a game social media site, and I don't know what it's called, and
Okay.
I don't want to go and ask him. So he got chatting to this girl,
Yeah.
and it obviously wasn't. I think he got
Well, he
sent
thought it
pictures.
was. He thought it was.
He thought, oh yes, he obviously thought it was,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
got persuaded to send a video of
Right.
himself doing things
Yes.
back to them. And then the calls for money started, because they were going to send all the video to his workmates and anyone in his social media contacts. Fortunately, he rang me. I was away on holiday, and fortunately, he rang me to let me know what was happening. He was massively embarrassed, but
blimey.
he did ring me. I mean, it was awful.
How
'cause
much
he's
were they
very
asking
shy
for,
anyway.
if you don't mind me?
He wouldn't tell me. He just
Okay.
said it was hundreds of pounds.
And if
But
you
he-
didn't send it, they would do what?
They were going to release the video to his workmates and
Right.
anyone in his social media contacts.
Good God.
So he rang me. I was in the middle of nowhere, but managed to get his brother on the phone as well, who was at home in the UK. And we talked to him, and I took some advice. And I was told, if you stop engaging with them,
Yes.
they will go away.
Right.
And it's a big risk.
Of course
it
it
is
is.
a big risk. But if I had some friends with me who said if he gives them money, they will just keep coming back for more.
Yeah.
And they're probably, because they're criminal gangs, I understand, this this wasn't child sexual exploitation. He would have been on a list of that they were working through, working the contacts, trying to keep the pressure up on them. So we got him to disengage from all conversations with him. We got him to get rid of all these social media sites that he had. And then my sons both work in a nightclub, and I got my elder son to go in with him to work and speak to the managers and tell them what had happened.
Oh, Lord.
So that, he knew that we knew that they'd be all right. Nobody is going to care about this stuff except the young person themselves.
And particularly an autistic young person, I think.
Yeah, who has a nightmare of a life anyway.
Yeah.
So he just had to suck it up and sit and wait. And he had told work, so he knew that wasn't going to be a problem. His family knew, because fortunately he'd come to us and told us. But I just wanted to put this out there, because I understand it's quite common, and the gaming websites are often full of, obviously not all, but there are a lot of sort of lonely young men.
Yeah, and young boys, people who are underage and incredibly vulnerable to precisely the sort of approaches you describe. Who gave you the advice? Forgive me if you told me. I was reeling a bit from some of the other details.
It was just friends that I was on holiday with who knew a bit about this and said, just don't engage, and they will eventually stop getting in touch with him. And they couldn't get in touch with him anymore because he'd gone off presumably there's a chat function through this. But
they knew where he worked, so the fear that they might send it to people at work was real, and the threat was real, so they had leverage. I presume from your tone that they didn't.
No, they didn't. But he was very brave to go and see them at work, and he had his older brother to go with him, and it did help. And he just had to suck it up. But there was no alternative. They'd have just kept coming back for more and more, I was told. I just wanted to let people know this.
And again, it's a male rather than a female, which was my introduction to this practice. And the more you think about it, the more vulnerable boys are going to be, aren't they? Because the curiosity and all of that sort of thing online.
And they're sitting at home in their bedrooms. They've never had a girlfriend. He said, I just wanted a girlfriend. I've never had one. I just wanted one.
Oh, bless him.
So it was just a warning. I don't know what the media site's called, but I'm sure people with young.
I do. I think I do. I don't know how helpful it is to mention it, and that lots of people making the same suggestion. Thank you, Susan. You must have done something right, mustn't you, as a mum, in order to have had that level of trust with him. Sorry, Anna.
I don't know. I think he was desperate.
He had nowhere else to turn. Well, give yourself a bit of a pat on the back for that, because some poor kids felt that they couldn't even talk to their mums. So thank you, Anna. 24 after 11. The advice here is that if you discover something like this, if your child hasn't paid up yet, which is very much the situation that Anna found herself in, then don't reach for the credit card. There's no guarantee that paying a ransom will stop the sextortion. Instead, and it means that Anna got all the right advice. It says cut all communication with the person trying to extort them, block the account the sextorter has been communicating from, but don't delete the messages or the images, even if it is emotionally challenging for your child to keep these on their device, because they can be used as evidence in a police investigation, and more importantly, they can be helpful when trying to take your child's images offline. This is advice that comes from, I think, the Internet Watch Foundation, but you can read it in the Times today in an article by Chris Stokell-Walker. That you should also, it's recommended, speak to the safeguarding lead at your child's school. Thank you, Anna. Crikey. Susan's in Portsmouth. Susan, what can you tell us?
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Perfect segue. I am the safeguarding lead in a high school.
Bloody hell, it's almost like this programme's produced, isn't it? God.
And essentially exactly that. I have the poor task of dealing with these students, but also pleas from parents.
Yeah.
Parents ringing us up being like, I've just found out that my child has been involved in similar sort of situations. What do I do? How do I get my kid to talk to me? That type of thing. And unfortunately, I'm well versed in what we do.
How well versed? How? I mean, if you, I think you can probably tell me without any the disclosure issues. How? When did it first happen, and how often has it happened?
I've been teaching for about 8 years. I've been a safeguarding lead for a good number of those.
Yes.
We get problems with indecent images.
Yes.
Near every other week. We have problems with sort of grooming-y, extortion, sharing of images type things, maybe once a month, every other month, something
days.
like that.
Really?
Yeah.
And that's the ones you know about. That's the ones where the kids have come forward or the parents have found out.
Exactly. And like that's what prompted me to ring. One particular case comes to mind. Again, I'm not going to break any sort of confidentiality here, but a top set boy who is incredibly intelligent, and if I was to line up every kid in our school and think who might fall for one of these things, he would not be on my radar.
Yeah.
But he got sort of hoodwinked by an attractive teenage girl online, who obviously wasn't a teenage girl online,
right.
And genuinely thought that she was real because on her profile she was friends, in inverted commas, with all of his friends on social media.
Because you follow someone, they follow you back.
It literally that, exactly that. And so they got talking. He did the stereotypical teenage thing, falling for this girl. They exchanged intimate photos, and then a little bit down the line, he realised that those photos were just ripped offline, like her photos, shall we say, were just stock images from elsewhere. She started to blackmail, if you will, him by saying, I need more photos, otherwise I'm going to release your image.
Yeah.
And
did he know at this point that he'd been hoodwinked as soon as it got aggressive?
Yes and no.
Okay.
He knew that she was manipulating him, but he genuinely thought that she was a real teenager, basically bit up to no good.
Yes.
And it was only when I pointed out that, okay, have you ever seen her in real life? Have you ever spoken to her on the phone? No. Has anyone you know? No, but I'm friends with all of these people online. She's mutual friends. Yeah, no. Have they ever met her? No. And you could see the penny drop. Luckily, his parents found out that his image had been leaked online quickly enough for them to report to me to sort out the young lad, report it to the police. We shut down his account, all of this, that and the other, before money was exchanged. But he was so close, and like I said, top set kid.
Who did he come to first, you or his parents?
He didn't come to his parents. I think maybe one of his friends or something told his parents. His parents rang us, and I pulled him out of a lesson, and I sort of levelled with him and sort of like, this is going to be an awkward conversation for both of us.
Yeah.
But
what was he like? What was his reaction? I know you've done it more than once, but in this particular case,
he hung his head. Initially wanted to sort of deny it, and I sort of reassured him that I've done this unfortunately so many times. So there is no shame in this. He was just embarrassed, but also wanted it to stop. And tragically, he really felt he'd let down his parents, which obviously isn't the case.
No, of course not. But you always do, don't you, when you're that age?
Yeah. One little nuance, if I may. I want to flag that when a lot of the time when we to the police and they help, they do have that small clause, which is if a child takes a picture of themselves, technically they have made an indecent image of themselves.
Yeah, of course.
And we warn our students in their PSHE lessons about taking those intimate photos.
In any context.
So it's another reason.
So it's another reason not to do that. But do you warn them about this now as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
But what we have had cited back to us from the kid is I didn't want to say anything because I knew that the police don't like us taking intimate photos. So they almost...
so you've successfully driven home the don't take intimate photos message, albeit that they've ignored it, but you've driven it home successfully enough for them to think, well, I can't go to the authorities with this because I've done that thing they told me not to do.
Yes.
Oh, that's so interesting. This is grim stuff, isn't it? Do you get the support you need? Do you get the kind of...
Yeah, and honestly, we have a really good supportive team amongst us, but honestly, seeing the kid getting a big hug from their parents and their parents telling them it's okay. That's all that we need, that we've helped sort of pull them out of that hole.
Set me off then. That's well done.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
26 minutes after 12. I'm always guided by you. Well, not always, because sometimes you might have gone a bit bonkers. But I am generally guided by you. So I can tell you that there is an instant messaging and VoIP social platform which allows communication through voice calls, video calls, text messaging and media and files called Discord. I have no idea if that is the one that was alluded to by an earlier caller, but I am more than happy for people concerned about what they should be checking and where they should be looking to share the fact that that is an incredibly popular social platform where it would be possible for some of the things that we've described to happen, although I'm sure that they are just as disgusted and concerned about these matters as I am. On a slightly lighter note, because I feel the need to put a little pause between the last two calls and the next one, I'm going to read you a message from Andy in Basingstoke, which is, listen, what I don't want to do with this is start an avalanche of agreement, because I'm not sure that I could cope with that. He writes, James, I really do enjoy your show so much. You are a journalist of the highest calibre, but often I have to switch off because of your habit of noisily swallowing or suppressing a belch right into the microphone. You probably don't even notice it, but it is very off-putting. Please listen back to your current show. All the best, Andy in Basingstoke. I notice the heavy breathing of another colleague sometimes, but not to the point of switching off. Why? So is this a thing? Apparently, Keith agrees. Is it because I've just had a sip of tea? Is it, or it's well? But everyone swallows when they talk. And if you don't swallow when you talk, what are you going to do? I get a spittoon in the studio, will I? Well, Andy, I will endeavour to improve. And I suppose that is a more reasonable grounds for getting in touch to tell me that you're not listening to the programme anymore than having fallen for a completely bogus, ridiculous and even perhaps anti-Semitic conspiracy theory perpetrated on the internet, because I'm getting a few messages today from people who've done precisely that. And it's quite interesting, because normally they would be people, I think, who considered facts and evidence to be important and online conspiracy theories to be the kind of thing that they wouldn't fall for in a million years. But hey-ho, here we go. 11:36 is the time. Jenny is in Woolwich to steer us back to this. I don't like the word, Jenny, of sextortion, because it almost trivialises the issue. There's nothing trivial about what happened in your family, I don't think.
No, that's true. I don't like the word either. It's the first time I heard it, although this happened to a 14-year-old family member of mine about 2 years ago. And the reason I wanted to ring in was really about and I'm very, very pleased you're talking about it and highlighting it, because it's around the lack of understanding and sensitivity demonstrated by the police in our case.
Oh.
So do you want me to just tell you what happened?
Please.
As briefly as I can. So
don't cough like that, because Andy in Basingstoke will get really cross with you.
Sorry, let me just cough away and clear my throat.
You do, go on, of course. Take a moment, that's fine.
Okay, it's gone, I'm clear.
Well done.
Sorry, Andy in Basingstoke. My 14-year-old family member was caught up in this. He was on Instagram. He got talking. He had a private account. A girl supposedly direct messaged him, and he got chatting. And then she suggested they swap photographs, and she swapped one, and he swapped one relatively innocent of him. And then she asked for something more detailed, and he shared something a bit more explicit of a body part of his. And the very next message from, in inverted commas, her was, if you do not pay me £500 immediately, I will share this with your contacts list, which I have. She then proceeded to send him a screenshot of his contacts, his private Instagram account. He just deleted it and immediately deleted it. Didn't say anything.
Imagine how terrifying
he was. Very, very quiet for about a day, incredibly withdrawn.
So
and
parents know something's up.
Exactly. Yeah. It eventually came out, but in a flood of tears, what had happened. And
You're right.
Police were called, and the police sent round 2 policewomen who proceeded to tell him he had been very silly, what he'd done was completely wrong, and it would go on his record.
But he was the victim. And so this is playing into what Susan told us about not taking photographs of that constituting...
I was in the queue, so I'm afraid I didn't hear Susan.
Okay, well, because what it's
like a sort of form of
but there is a crime.
But
it is true though. It is an offence, oddly, to make an image of yourself, because it's the same as it would be if it was someone else making an image of an underage person. But I'm staggered.
That's right, and I didn't know that. So they told him it would go on his record. It wouldn't be marked down as a crime, but it would go on his record, and it was a very silly thing of him to have done.
Outrageous.
And hopefully you'll learn from it.
And any help at all in tracking down the person that was actually a criminal?
Not at all. And this person had all these other names. So those other names were contacted by my family to make sure they were aware of it. But not only that, the victim in question, let's say, 14-year-old family member, was unbelievably upset that the police had been called, went on to not trust us.
So there was a breakdown in family relations as well. There's a little bit we missed because your phone line went a bit funny. How did the adults come to that? Did he tell them? But he told his parents, but he didn't want his parents to tell the police. How did that?
No, he told his mother, who broke down in tears, phoned me and his sister, and I said, "God, you have to call the police. Right. That's what you have to do. You have to call. You have to. Otherwise, there are other people going to be involved in this too." So
and he hadn't sent any money at that.
He stopped it. He didn't. He just froze and closed it down. Closed it down, and then didn't say anything about it for about a day until it all just got too much. And my sister was asking, "What is wrong? Something's wrong," and then it all kind of burst out in this flood. But then he was unbelievably upset. He didn't particularly want to talk to the police, but went along with it. But when they left, I told you, never should have, And then
I have to say, a lot of people are getting in touch as you speak, and you'll understand why it's important that I explain this, to say that wouldn't happen now. That is very much a consequence of the relative novelty of the offence and the inexperience of those police officers. So the last thing that either you or I want to do is discourage people from coming forward or calling the authorities in. Today, because of experiences suboptimal, I mean really unfair experiences that happened a couple of years ago. So I'm getting that from serving police officers as well as NSPCC guidelines. Yeah, NSPCC guidelines. How is he now then? How, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't know. We haven't really talked about it since. And I totally agree with you. They may well have been 2 very inexperienced policewomen, and I would totally not want to be my story to put off anybody from calling the police, because we have some very positive experiences with the police, and I'm sure, I really hope. But I am glad that you're talking about it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you are.
It can be learned from.
Well, exactly. And every single example so far is a boy. Which was not what I was expecting when I felt the gaps in the story I was told by some friends before Christmas be filled in by the news this week from the National Crime Agency. I said that I would share some details. Obviously 101 or 999 are the numbers that you need when you want to call in the police. You could contact directly the National Crime Agency's Child Exploitation and Online Protection a team, all sorts of other charities, Childline and Brook, that have advice on how children can explore sexuality safely, including online. But as I say, research in these kind of areas always Esther is in York. Esther, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I think I know a bit more than most, unfortunately, about this topic. I'm a court reporter, and I could only describe it as an epidemic. Day in, day out, these people are in court for doing this to young girls, young boys.
Oh Lord, really?
And
When did the dam break, for want of a better?
I think the rise of, I'm going to say Snapchat is the worst or the most frequently mentioned, because the rise of these sophisticated messaging services where messages disappear.
Yes.
And so young girls, young boys, they think they're pretty safe. They think they're sending something temporary. But of course, messages can be saved, images can be saved.
Lord.
You sit in court, and in the public gallery, there'll be a boy, and perhaps he's gay, and he's not told his family, he's not told his school friends. And so he's fallen victim to a predatory male, grooming him, asking for pictures, and then making horrific threats or demanding money. Sometimes it's young girls. They can be, 12, 13. They're often the girls that perhaps don't have confidence, don't fit in. Yeah. Perhaps they've never had a boyfriend and they want to
that's what happened to the family I know. That was very much the scenario there. It's gross. I had no idea it was so widespread. You are.
And it's clever.
I think you're the court reporter for Teesside Live and the Gazette.
I am, but the stories go national often,
of course they
because
do.
They're so horrific. They really are.
And these are the ones that get all the way to court. Is that? I mean, the appetite for prosecution and the ease of identifying culprit is something I know nothing about.
I only know about the ones that get to court, and I try and only cover one a day because I don't want to cover too many people.
But if you wanted to, you could cover more than one case a day of this crime, this type of crime.
Very, very easily, but for my mental health, I try not to.
You're not kidding. And what sort of sentences are routinely handed down in the event of a conviction?
Some of these cases get very, very serious. There was a case recently where a man was demanding naked images from a girl, and he got them, and of course, but then he went to meet her. She didn't know. On her way home from school, off a school bus, tried to stab her. So some of them get very, very serious. Right. Others are lower level, and we're looking at 3, 4, 5 years in jail, and of course they serve half. And
if I was caught doing that, well, not me, but if someone was caught doing what we've been talking about today, the blackmail, the procuring the pictures and then using it to try to get money out of a young person, what sort of sentence is in place on that very specific crime?
It's really hard for me to say.
Okay, fair enough. It's an irresponsible question. Well, not irresponsible. It's a silly question. Esther, thank you. Esther Halligan, I think, is your full byline. So thank you for that.
Esther Halligan, and stay off Snapchat. It's the only thing I've got to say.
Stay off Snapchat from someone sitting in a court, literally covering the consequences of these experiences in these cases. Those are pretty powerful words, aren't they? Stay off Snapchat. 11:47 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 12 is the time. That headline, I did actually forget. I was reminded by esteemed colleagues, but I did actually forget to tell you that the headline did in fact appear certainly in the Mail online. I haven't been able to find it in the print edition, but I can only expose myself to the print edition of the Daily Mail in relatively small doses. I haven't been able to find it in the print edition, but I can tell you that the online edition of the Daily Mail did carry the headline this morning, and I don't know whether you want to make a note about this in your Brexit calendar. Brits face higher grocery bills as retailers warn post-Brexit border checks coming into force today mean they will have to put up the price of food imported from the EU. So there you go. It's taken 8 years. But finally, the Daily Mail, which is still publishing Daniel Hannan, would you believe? I don't want to spoil Unhinged headline, but it's still publishing Daniel Hannan on another subject. But the Daily Mail, that probably did more than any other organ in the country to persuade the population that leaving the European Union would bring about cheaper food, or certainly wouldn't bring about more expensive food, now admitting, if you like, in an article that these new border checks will mean that the price of food imported from the EU goes up, something that my friend and regular guest on the programme, Andreas Georgiou, has been warning us about for years. And it is to him that we turn. And I would stress that Andreas's Greengrocers in Chelsea is arguably the best in the country. He deals with the kind of food that is incredibly good provenance, incredibly good origin, and his clientele includes some of the most famous chefs and restaurants in the country. And I mention that because if it's affecting that level of food supply, then you can only imagine what is going to be happening as you make your way down the kind of provenance pyramid to the imports and exports of other foods as well. And also, of course, because it is the smaller outfits that are going to be hit the hardest. So we've had 24 hours, Andreas, to measure the success or otherwise of the new checks, the new regime. What have we learned?
Morning, James. Well, immediately what we learn is that Sevington, the new facility for doing checks, which is roughly 50 miles outside of Dover, ceased to function last night, which meant a massive backlog of lorries. Also due to the fact that obviously HGV drivers can only do a certain amount of hours, so they had to sort of give up. And then at 4:20 this morning, I was notified that 2 such lorries with lots of my stuff on, one from Smith & Brock and one from European Speciality Foods, were stuck in there and
waiting to be processed, waiting for the checks to take
but they
place.
had to stop the process simply because they run out of hours of waiting. So they both arrived sort of between 7 and 9 last night, which is normal time.
But they have to stop work because of the working time directive, which means they have to park up and wait until the next morning so that they can then get into the queue to be...
That's correct. But the most startling fact in all of this is that the Customs Office didn't open till 10 a.m. to begin the processing of the backlog.
Oh my days! Do we know why? I mean, maybe they were busy.
They needed a manager on site. Look, there is a chronic shortage of customs agents. We discussed this as far back as 2017, I think, and nothing has improved.
No.
And again, you know, it's very much like sort of flying on a low-cost airline where they don't tell you what's going on. No one knew anything.
But this is perishable food, mate, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I've got basically at the moment about 14, 15 grams worth of food stuck at Sevington. It's not going to arrive today, so that's a day less selling. We brought in a massive amount of staff. It is also the busiest day of the year so far for freight from Europe, simply because it's May Day in Europe today, so there's no purchasing from any of the European markets.
So that's incredibly poor planning then, just unavoidable as well, to the literally 24-hour specific.
Yeah, but do it a month ago. But they've also now told, DEFRA have now alerted all drivers to stop wherever they are and not head to Sevington. So wherever you are, just stop. Wherever you are on whatever motorway you are, just stop.
But this morning, DEFRA were telling Reuters, I think, that everything was going swimmingly.
Yes, it's a lie.
Well,
and they lied last night. Well, I can say that.
I couldn't possibly comment.
So it's a shameless lie. But look, we're used to it now. We're used to bad planning. I mean, yesterday I was chatting with another news network. Sorry. For playing away from home.
I can't believe it.
Sorry. I'm going
to buy my strawberries and my asparagus elsewhere.
No, it was a European network.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's allowed. And I said, I don't know what to expect, but I would suspect that it will be a disaster because everything this lot have touched is a disaster.
I mean, is this a teething trouble? Is there any hope that it would?
Yeah, well, Sevington wasn't finished. It looks, I mean, the pictures I sent this morning, you can see it's still port cabins and whatever. But you've had 8 years.
Yeah.
This is my argument. You've had 7 or 8 years to get your stuff together.
Thank you. Yes. You're not at the market now, Andrea.
No, but I'm sorry.
We jest, and we're friends. For people who don't know, we're friends off air, have been for years. And you're always upbeat. You're always very optimistic, albeit that you're not frightened of expressing an opinion. Are you worried? Are you worried for your business?
I mean, look, we have to be honest. We pulled in loads of staff today because we had all these pallets of produce coming in. Everyone's standing around scratching their nethers, you know. So I've had to send people home, which I still have to pay them because they're all on salaries.
Of course.
There's only so much cleaning you can do. There's people who have been let down, who have orders. You know, it's a big French holiday today. There's people who wanted beautiful French produce. We've had to let them down. I mean, yeah, poor little me in Chelsea, but it's not just poor little me. There's hundreds of retailers being affected by this.
And is there any light at the end of the tunnel, in your view, at the moment?
I mean, I would suspect that, without being in the know, that Europe won't talk to this government anymore because they've got no credibility. We only hope that after the next election, should we have a change of government, and it'll be impossible to believe we won't, that some sort of headway is made with Europe and we can return to some semblance of normality, because this is going to cost so much, not just to the food industry, the motor industry, fish, everyone. Even the pharmacy I'm staring at opposite is being affected.
We've covered that as well. And of course, there are other factors, and there are also problems in Europe. Spanish drought has affected a lot of issues as well. But every problem we have gets magnified and exacerbated by Brexit, never more clearly than today. On a more positive note, how is the new restaurant performing?
It's going very, very well.
That's what we like to hear.
It's a really good start. But again, you're putting all this investment into essentially 2 new businesses this year.
Yes.
And we're losing turnover because we don't have the stuff on the shelves. I mean, it's not, there are alternatives, but not what people want. But going back to the thing about weather change and whatever, the government, and Boris Johnson was a big champion of weather change and climate control. Yes. He knew that crops would be affected by climate change, but still went through with this catastrophic deal which him and Frost signed cynically on that Christmas Eve.
And you are now paying the price for their cynicism.
Me and the entire country.
Of course. But I'm only talking to you at the moment. Andreas Georgiou, owner of Andreas Greengrocery in Chelsea, and the restaurant right next door, which uses a lot of the produce, all the produce from the shop, which is called Kale Street with a K. And I had the great privilege of having an early taste of some of the stuff on the menu there. But, and as I say, that is just one... 16 grand's worth, did he say? 13, 14, 15, 16 grand's worth of produce, fresh produce, stuck outside the Sevington branch for the fairly simple reason that it shuts at 7. So you'll be sleeping in your truck. The food will be going off in the back, and waiting for the next morning when it doesn't open until 10 a.m. I wanted to play that little clip of Jacob Rees-Mogg, which I thought at this point in proceedings might be a timely reminder, but I suspect that Andreas's head might explode if we were to do the clip of him either saying cheap food for peasants, or saying, of course, that this is an act of national self-harm. Brackets, please don't mention that I sold it to the country under false pretences. Natasha Clark is here, LBC's political editor, to cast a predictive eye over the looming PMQs.
May I first compliment your Jacob Rees-Mogg impression?
It's all right.
It's not bad,
It needs work.
It's not bad.
It needs work. Where are we? What's going on? What are we expecting today?
So, obviously, my sincere apologies for missing last week's PMQs, because I was in Berlin and Poland with the PM. So I imagine he might want to mention that if he's got a chance to stay on the front foot. But I don't think it's going to be quite as scrappy as what we had Oliver Dowden v Rayner last week. However, it is the last PMQs before elections take place tomorrow. Oh, yes. So we might get a little bit more scrappy and a little bit more heated a debate than we usually will.
Where is Sunak most vulnerable?
That's a really good question. Wasn't expecting that one. Things that I think could be, Brexit's a good shout on the border force. He could go with that.
Still a bit frightened to go in there.
Starmer is. Starmer, in terms of what he might go for, there's immigration, there's those lost removals. The government, I'm sure, will want to talk about Rwanda. Knife crime, I think, bearing in mind what happened in Hainault yesterday, I think we'll both see some probably more sombre, reflective statements from the two of them. And probably not going too far on the political attack. You might see Keir Starmer's talked about banning more, about loopholes in the law before. Maybe he will go there. Maybe he will decide today's not the day to do that.
Yes, we shall see.
We will see. But yes, is there a particular weakness for Sir Keir Starmer to go on? There's plenty to go on, but I don't think there's any one that stands out, I don't think, for me. Lost removals is a good one, potentially.
Yes, these are the thousands and thousands of people who've gone missing, despite them being on we're going to deport you if we ever get the planes into the air government's list. And this weird story today, in fact, both of Rupert Murdoch's main newspapers seem to be indulging in a little bit of PR for the government. You've got the claim about overall levels falling offered up as front page news in the Times, and a weird story in the Sun about someone who has had their asylum application processed in this country and it has failed, and they have accepted a voluntary offer to take £3,000 from the public purse and fly to Rwanda. So although the word Rwanda appears in the headline...
Voluntary should maybe also...
But it has absolutely nothing to do with the scheme that the government have passed legislation to introduce.
No, it's a similar scheme because they've opened
completely
it up
different one.
Yes, they've opened it up to Rwanda for the first time. So that is of interest and of note, but it's definitely not the same
Which
thing.
they couldn't do previously because Rwanda was unsafe. But they've changed the meaning of the word safe.
It's now safe.
In law. So.
Imagine being somebody from...
And anyway, Kemi Badenoch knows someone who went on holiday there. So, you know,
Must be fine.
never mind...
Gap year.
Never mind the Congolese refugees that were shot dead in 2018 for complaining about their food rations. Kemi Badenoch knows someone on a gap year.
Well, if we can find them...
So it must be safe. Indeed,
I think we should start the search.
This is the point in the week where I remind you that any minute now we will cross live to the House of Commons, and as soon as Sir Keir Starmer gets to his feet, and we will be listening, I think, to Stephen Flynn's exchanges with the Prime Minister with particular interest today as well.
Yes, and I wonder, Stephen Flynn often goes for Labour, doesn't he? And he usually uses his questions, usually one on Rishi and then one on Keir. But I wonder whether, bearing in mind the chaos that we've seen in Scotland, it's apparently electoral chaos is not just something that we find out down here in Westminster. It's also something that we see up in Scotland. He might be feeling like he might want to talk about something else. Maybe Gaza and the Middle East, maybe that proposed peace deal, he might want to raise that as a question today and not talk about the woes that his own party are experiencing at the moment.
There'll be some enjoyment of his discomfort, won't there, in the House, because he has made something of a speciality of going after Labour and Tories with almost equal alacrity as the Westminster
I
leader.
wonder if we could see the reverse happen today.
Exactly,
that might be quite funny.
They might gang up on him. Sarah in Leeds makes an excellent point when she says that your impression, James, of Jacob Rees-Mogg is not as good as Nick Abbott's, I'm afraid. Sarah, as I'm sure you know, nothing on this programme is as good as Nick Abbott's, but we can but try. 3 minutes after 12 is the time, so I mean, it's hard to see as you say, the levels of acrimony that we saw last week with Angela Rayner. When Sunak and Starmer start crossing swords. But we have got elections tomorrow. I'm always slightly frightened, and you're much newer to the broadcasting game than I am, so you should be even more frightened than I am of breaking Ofcom rules regarding what we can and can't say. But this is a huge test for Rishi Sunak, and not necessarily a cakewalk for Keir Starmer.
No, and I think, what many people are talking about in Westminster today is what this means for potentially Keir Starmer's election potential win in a general election, and whether that means that there are some people that can hold on to their seats with 10 to 20,000 majority, basically what the scale of the win looks like, what this will look like after the election.
We'll pick this up later. Here is Sir Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I join with the Prime Minister in his words about yesterday's awful events at Hainault. I'm sure the whole House will want to commend the first responders and send our deepest condolences to the family of the 14-year-old boy who was murdered. And I join with the Prime Minister's remarks about the attack in the school in Sheffield as well. I know everyone in this House will be delighted to see His Majesty the King returning to his public duties and looking so well, and we all wish him and the Princess of Wales the best in their continued recovery. I'd also like to welcome the member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich to his place on these benches. After nearly 2 decades as a Tory politician and an NHS doctor, Mr. Speaker, he's concluded that if you care about the future of our country and our NHS, then it's time for change. It's time for this changed Labour Party. And as of today, he's our newest Labour MP. But I'm sure he won't mind me saying that I hope he loses that title on Friday. Mr. Speaker, when a lifelong Tory and doctor says that the only cure for the NHS is a Labour government, isn't it the time the Prime Minister admits he has utterly failed?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to actually see the honourable gentleman from Central Suffolk. That's because he recently pointed out that residents of his local Labour council are, and I quote in his words, charged much more in council tax, but in return receive lower quality services. Now, he's been wrong about some things recently, but on that point, he's absolutely right. And this week, people everywhere should vote Conservative.
He comes out with all that nonsense, but he locks himself away in Downing Street bunker, moaning that people aren't grateful enough to him. The reality is Tory MPs are following Tory voters in concluding that only the Labour Party can deliver the change that the country needs. And I say to those Tory voters, if they believe in a better Britain, then they're safe with this changed Labour Party, and it's for them. Mr. Speaker, in the 2 weeks since we last met at this dispatch box, has the Prime Minister managed to find the money for his completely unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance?
Mr. Speaker, of course, we addressed that a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to address it again. But I know that economics is not his strong point, but he might do well. He might do well, actually, to listen to a shadow education secretary who just this morning said, no, that's not how it works, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, the IFS have also said the link between national insurance and public services funding is illusory, just like Labour's economic plans, Mr. Speaker. But it's crystal clear. There's one party that's going to deliver tax cuts for working Britain, and it's the Conservative Party.
That was a long ramble.
Order. Whoever's banging the furniture will have to pay for your damages. Can we have less of it? We are not at the sixth form now. Come on,
Well, that was a long rambling non-answer to the question, which was, has he found the money to fund his £46 billion promise to abolish national insurance? And whenever he's asked about the date of the election or people's pensions, he acts as if answering straightforward questions is somehow beneath him. But pensioners and those who are planning their retirement deserve better than his contempt for their questions. Because if £46 billion were cut from its funding, the value of the state pension would almost half. So I don't apologise for asking him again.
Order. Mr. Gullis, you've got the next question you're not going to reach. You've got a 10-minute rule bill. I'd be quiet for a while if I were you. Prime Minister. Sorry, Leader of the Opposition.
So I don't apologise for asking on their behalf again whether he will finally rule out cutting their state pension to fulfil the enormous black hole in his spending plans.
Mr. Speaker, of course we can rule that out, and the honourable gentleman should stop scaremongering, because it's thanks to the triple lock that we've increased pensions by £3,700 since 2010, and they will rise in each and every year of the next Parliament. But it's Labour that always hits pensioners hard. It's his mentors, Blair and Brown, that broke their promises, raised pension taxes by £118 billion and delivered an insulting 75p rise in the state pension. As one former Labour advisor just said, Brown destroyed our pension system. They did it before, they'll do it again. Labour always betray our pensioners.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear he can't answer the question where he's going to find this £46 billion. No, he said, luckily for him, that's where he said it's not coming from. It's not said where it's coming from. Luckily for him, one of his peers, Lord Frost, yes, him again, does. He says to solve the Tory spending plans, the state pension age should be raised to 75. Now, understandably, that will cause some alarm. So will the Prime Minister rule out forcing people to delay their retirement by years and years in order to fulfil his £46 billion black hole?
Mr. Speaker, I've answered this multiple times to the Honourable General. I'm happy to say again, this is the party that has delivered and protected the triple lock. But I know, Mr. Speaker, ultimately he's not worried about any of this, because we all remember that he's got his very own personal pension plan. I think we all remember it, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, it comes with its very own special law. It was called the Pension Increase Scheme for Keir Starmer QC. It's literally one law for him and another one for everyone else.
He wants to abolish national insurance. It'll cost £46 billion, and he won't tell us where the money is coming from. We're no closer to an answer. I'm going to persevere, because last year the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners. His Paymaster General went a step further. He said these are the sorts of things that we need to look at. So will he now rule out taking pensioners' winter fuel payments off them to help fund his £46 billion black hole?
Mr. Speaker, it was this government that just this winter provided double the winter fuel payment to support pensioners. But what is crystal clear, Mr. Speaker, is that we believe that the double taxation on work is unfair, Mr. Speaker. We believe that hard work should be rewarded, and that's why this week we're cutting taxes by £900 for everyone in work. But in contrast, Mr. Speaker, it's Labour's newest tax advisor who thinks pensioners should be taxed more. That's his words, Mr. Speaker. This advisor calls them codgers. He thinks that supporting them is a disgrace, and he believes that their free TV licences are ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. It's Labour who hit pensioners with tax after tax, and they would do it all over again.
Mr. Speaker, is it any wonder that his MPs are following Tory voters in queuing up to dump his party? And even the mayors that he's apparently pinning his political survival on don't want to be seen anywhere near him, because until he starts setting out how he's paying for his fantasy economics, he's got a completely unfunded £46 billion promise that puts people's retirement at risk. How does it feel to be one day out from elections with the message, vote Tory, risk your pension?
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow voters will have a choice, and it will be a choice between mayors like Andy Street and Ben Houchen who are delivering, or mayors like Sadiq Khan who just simply virtue signal, Mr. Speaker. It's higher taxes, more crime and ULEZ with Labour, or it's lower taxes and better services with the Conservatives. That's the choice. From West Midlands to Teesside to London, there is only one choice. Vote Conservative.
Mr. Speaker, we concede the Rwanda deterrent is working, and we've now deported our first illegal migrants. But unsurprisingly, Labour just don't care. The Shadow Home Secretary is busy posing for pics, encouraging more boats to come over. The leader of the Labour Party said he would cancel the Rwanda flights. He took a knee when signing letters stopping us deporting illegal foreign national offenders who committed crimes like murder and rape. And he'd do a deal with the EU, surrendering our borders to 100,000 legal migrants. Isn't it right, Prime Minister, that only the Conservatives will stop the boats and cut legal migration?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is working. Legal migration, the latest figures show, down by 24%. Student dependence down by 80%. But we all know Labour's big idea. It's to scrap the Rwanda plan, even when it's operational, Mr. Speaker. But as one senior Labour advisor said to Andrew Marr just yesterday, we can't just come in, tear it up and have nothing to put in its place. I'm sorry to break it to them, but that's exactly their policy. While we're getting on stopping the boats, all Labour would do is stop the planes.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Armed Forces Minister was neither able to confirm nor deny that UK troops may soon be deployed on the ground in the Middle East. Now, the public watching will be hoping that members of this House do not have a short memory when it comes to the potential deployment and involvement of our military in the Middle East. So can I ask the Prime Minister to provide some much needed clarity? Is he giving active consideration to the deployment of UK forces in the Middle East, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, you wouldn't expect me to get into any operational planning details, but what I will say is we are absolutely committed to supporting international efforts to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is something I think the whole House would support by land, sea and air. We've obviously tripled our aid commitment, and right now, together with the US, Cyprus and other partners, we're setting up a new temporary pier off the coast of Gaza to get aid in as securely and quickly as possible.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, let's all be in no doubt, aid is required in Gaza, and it is required because when people are not being bombed, they are starving to death. The solution to that is a ceasefire and the opening of safe ground air routes, not the involvement on the ground of UK military personnel. These are dramatic and potentially dangerous developments. So will the Prime Minister confirm to the House today that before he makes a decision, all members will be afforded a vote?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to apologise for our armed forces playing a leading role in supporting international efforts to get more aid in. And indeed, we are sending Royal Navy support ship RFA Cardigan Bay to the region to support that effort. But when he talks about this conflict, the fastest way to end this conflict is to ensure that we have a hostage deal that gets hostages out, aid in, and for there to be a sustainable pause in the fighting. And it seems clear that there now is a workable offer on the table. So I hope he joins with me in encouraging all parties, including Hamas, to accept that deal so we can move towards a sustainable solution.
Sir Bill Wigan. My right honourable friend's decision to cancel HS2 led to 207
18 minutes after 12, perhaps a timely moment before we turn our attention to the latest embarrassment of Jonathan Gullis. I feel for Roddy. I have to apologise to Roddy, who has texted me to say, who is that shouty buffoon? And then texted me again to say, the one that spoke before Stephen Flynn. That was Jonathan Gullis making a complete fool of himself in the House of Commons for reasons that I will explain shortly. But with reference to that mooted ceasefire in the Middle East as well, you deserve to know that Israel will attack the city of Rafah in southern Gaza, regardless of whether or not a ceasefire and hostage release deal is reached. Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday, this is a statement from his office in which the Israeli Prime Minister said, the idea that we will stop the war before achieving all its objectives is out of the question. So highly unlikely that Rishi Sunak was unaware of that. We will pick over the other elements of that PMQs with Natasha Clark after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 12. Words are important, aren't they? The government, of course, has succeeded in changing the meaning of the word unsafe into safe. But of poor old Jonathan Gullis, who, it says here, Natasha Clark, used to be a teacher.
He did.
What did he teach? Don't say children.
I think it was primary education, so I think it was a range of subjects.
Oh, my days.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
So, anyway, deportation is a
We've just looked up the definition of deportation.
Don't say that. I knew this already.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure.
Well, you just looked it up. I haven't looked it up.
Look,
it's a legal process, and the key words are removed forcefully from the territory of the United Kingdom.
Which he would have done if he'd not been accepted this voluntary.
Well, he might have done, but it's a very long flipping queue, and he certainly wouldn't have gone to Rwanda because that plane hasn't taken off yet. So he's been given $3,000 to make his way entirely voluntarily to Rwanda, having had his application in this country fail, which puts him in precisely no categories currently occupied by the people who are supposed to be due for deportation to Rwanda. So Jonathan Gullis not only failing to understand the meaning of simple words like removed and forcefully, but also failing to understand his own government's policy. Bless his little cotton socks. But I think we both should have a slither of humble pie for forgetting all about Dan Poulter.
Look, I'm going to defend that.
Didn't I even say to you, where is Rishi Sunak most vulnerable?
And then and that would have been my perfect moment to say this is where he is most vulnerable.
Well,
because
exactly.
That absolutely. But you know what, I'm going to defend that because I don't think anybody beyond Westminster bubble had heard of Dan Poulter before this weekend's events. And
one of my followers on Twitter they told me that even at university he was known as Tory Dan.
Okay, well that's great.
There you go. So they knew him, but they went to university with him. That doesn't really count.
Look, I don't think he's, like I say, despite being a junior health minister, I don't think he was hugely well known. Not saying that excuses any of this, but the fact that Westminster and clearly the media elite of you and I, James, have forgotten this in the last 24 hours because we've been focusing on other events. You know, it's obviously not had quite the splash that Labour had hoped it might into this week. And, you know, they had 24 hours of this. What does this mean for Rishi Sunak? What does this mean for the NHS? You know, critical attacks, and rightly so, from Dan Poulter's it is a big deal for when a politician, especially a Conservative politician, defects to the Labour Party. He didn't look hugely happy about Sir Keir Starmer using Prime Minister's questions to hail him coming over to the floor. Pretty sombre expression on his face.
He must have known it was going to happen, mustn't he?
Surely, but he didn't look hugely delighted about it. But yes, that is a huge weakness, I think, for Rishi Sunak as we go into these local elections. And Keir Starmer wants to make a big deal of the NHS and the poke holes in the government's record on the NHS. It's something that Rishi Sunak has repeatedly failed to do. It's, of his 5 promises, arguably, it's the one that he's failed most on, right? He's not reduced those waiting lists at all. They've gone up under his premiership. It is arguably his biggest weakness at the moment.
And yet Starmer kept banging the drum about national insurance or the shortfall in national insurance. Is that working?
Well, it must be. I think I counted at least 6 times. Yes. He mentioned £46 billion black hole. And obviously they must have some research and focus groups within the Labour Party about what economic messages are hitting home. And they have obviously long said that they want to, restore their position as a party of economic credibility, and they have sensed a chink in the Tory armour to absolutely go for is that the Conservatives say they want to scrap national insurance at some point. They haven't said when, they haven't said how, and they haven't said it will be funded. Labour, rightly go on the morning round, and we media rightly scrutinise them about where they're going to pay for all their promises. So they're finally having an opportunity to turn it round onto the Conservatives, and they're absolutely going for it.
I'd cautiously suggest it didn't really land.
I don't think so, no. I don't think so.
Sunak certainly seemed relatively untroubled by it. He was in a surprisingly peppy mood. He
was pretty upbeat, I think. And like I say, I think,
maybe he's looking forward to a nice long holiday.
Yeah, maybe he's looking forward to what might happen in the next few days. But yes, I think he is in a bit of a peppier mood. He's obviously feels a bit more on the front foot when he's talking about policy, and he has had a very policy-heavy week. Talking about defence spending, talking about welfare reform, and various other things that he feels very comfortable talking about. And obviously we've had this tax cut as well that he's keen to talk about coming in this week as well. I'm sure not absolutely in any way timed for any local elections coverage at all.
Actually, a lot of mention of pensioners as well by both leaders, which reminds us that with elections, local elections and one by-election and some mayoral elections due to unfold tomorrow, pensioners are historically the most likely demographic to turn up at the ballot box, aren't they?
They are indeed, but we are expecting a very low turnout, according to all the pollsters and experts that have been telling us they don't expect it's going to be more than 35% at a push. But yes, the people that usually turn out to vote and usually turn out to vote Conservative are those older people. So I'm not surprised that Rishi Sunak might want to talk about it, but it is a surprise, I think, that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are really going after the pensioner vote and saying in as many words that they will keep the triple lock, that they will put that in the party manifesto. And that's something that, both parties have now committed to. There's not really a dividing line, I don't think, on pensions that they can go for. They're trying to say, and you heard Keir Starmer try and basically pin him down, saying, well, where are you going to find this money from? Where is it going to come from? And Rishi Sunak did something which he doesn't usually do. He ruled something out. He never usually does that. He never usually goes into it. He usually gives a very generic answer. But he said, no, absolutely not. I will not cut the state pension. Stop scaremongering. Yeah. That was his sort of reply. But then Keir Starmer goes, OK, well, do you want to rule out something else then instead? And, that gives him the onus to continue that argument.
And I mean, are there any more serious reasons as to why he may have been in a fairly upbeat? Maybe he might have been faking it, I suppose. It's all about presentation, isn't it? But I did read that he told assembled backbenchers last night that they're about to be, or party workers last night, that they're about to be part of the biggest political comeback in history. Is it possible that Rishi Sunak believes that?
I don't think so. I sort of giggled at that. I don't think that's something that's on the cards. What does he mean by political comeback? Does he mean
it means he'll win
the local elections? Does he mean he's going to go on to win the next election?
I presume that's what he meant.
There's rallying your troops, and then there's delusional. And I think most people
will say
that's
tell them they're going to
delusional.
lose, can you? You can't stand in
But there's a difference between that and saying we're going to be part of the biggest political comeback in history. And I think that really felt over the top to me. But look, tomorrow's local elections, as we were discussing before we crossed over to PMQs, is about the scale of the loss. And if the Conservatives can create this narrative that things aren't quite as bad bad as the polls suggest, that actually they can hold on to some particular areas in the Red Wall, perhaps those Middle England voters in Birmingham and West Midlands. If they can hang on to them, maybe the scale of losses won't be quite as bad. That will give Tory MPs a little bit of hope, a little bit of optimism, and it will also stop them from launching a coup against them next week if all goes terribly, terribly wrong.
Do you preempt my final question, which is a return to one that you were in the middle of answering before Sir Keir Starmer got to his feet. The question I get asked most often, and I'm back on the road now with the paperback of my book, so I get asked questions a lot. The question I get asked most often is whether or not there's any prospect at all of them going for their sixth leader in 8 years.
It doesn't feel like it to me. No. You can usually feel the Tory rebellion brewing in the air. It's sort of a bit like, the weather, right? You can sort of feel it when it gets colder. But I don't think I can feel that right now. It does feel that there's not a general sense that now is the time to do that. I think most people think it would be an insane idea.
It's rallying point and appetite, I think, isn't it? And if you have both in place, it might happen.
This is a rallying point, and the Conservatives...
But I mean a person rallying point, someone around whom they can rally. That's not there. If it was, the appetite might be there.
Potentially.
And if the appetite was there, then someone might come forward and be a better rallying point. But at the moment, we've got neither.
The Tory rebels have repeatedly used May as a sort of a point where they want to go for. We're expected to not do that well in the local elections, and they're expected to use that. But look, this is probably the last point that they're going to be able to point to say we could get rid of him. Like, what else? What other flashpoints are there between now and an election where they could potentially say Rishi Sunak's going to face some weaknesses? Let's move now. This is their last point. If he does any better than expected, they're going to have absolutely no chance to get rid of him before the next election.
Busy day for you tomorrow. Thank you, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. Up next, two authors. Actually, it's becoming something of a feature on Wednesday afternoons after PMQs. First, Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist that we've referred to a few times on the programme and author of the new book, The Anxious Generation, which seeks to save the teenagers we've been talking about a lot lately, whose lives are being damaged in many ways by the phenomenon of smartphone access. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. A quick word to this texter, or rather this WhatsApper, wondering whether they've done something wrong. Do you ever actually read out your WhatsApps, James? Or am I being discriminated against because of my name? And that's from someone called Boris. So I can promise you that you're not being discriminated against because of your name. But that's the second appearance of Boris on my screen in the last few minutes, because Richard's been in touch when we talked about political comebacks with the words, "Oh God, not Boris." But we step away from the parliamentary politics now and turn our attention instead to a topic that I told you we were going to be talking about a lot more, and I told you was fascinating for a number of reasons, not least because of the tension between the idea that the genie, if you like, of smartphone usage by teenagers in particular could and or should be got back into the bottle. And when we've turned our attention to this topic, the name Jonathan Haidt has appeared in pretty much every conversation we've had. He is the author of The Anxious Generation, which is subtitled How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And I mean, publishing can be a cynical business, Jonathan. It has landed at an almost perfect time for public discourse in this country. Mm-hmm. I presume you're aware of that.
Yes, I am. It's sort of parents have been seeing this since the early 2010s, and at first we weren't very alarmed because we all thought, it's technology, it's the internet, it's going to make our kids really computer savvy. But gradually in the 2010s, we got more and more alarmed as our kids seemed to be sort of missing childhood and be kind of zombies. And by late last year, I would say, there was not universal, but very, very widespread concern among parents that something is just not right. This is wrong, both in your country and in mine. And then things really have taken off in Britain. Both you have you actually have a functioning legislature. It may not seem that way to many Brits, but compared to us, you actually have a functioning legislature. So you've had laws passed, you've had guidance on phone-free schools, and you've had like almost a parents' rebellion. So yes, things are happening just in the last 2 or 3 months.
And you are, your day job is as a professor of ethical leadership with a specialism, a particular interest in social psychology and morality. So when did your antennae start twitching on this issue?
So I got into this. So my main area of research is moral psychology, specializing in political psychology, the culture war, left, right. And I got drawn into this topic because something went really crazy on American campuses in 2015. It was very sudden, 2014 to 2015. And that led me to write a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it was about how Gen Z, we didn't know it at the time, but what we now call Gen Z was just really different psychologically, much more fragile and much more prone to be harmed by words. So that's what got me into it. I wrote that book, and then I thought, okay, now I'll return to my real work, which is studying how social media is messing up democracy, how it's destroying public discourse. But the data kept coming in on kids and the mental health crisis, and I kept finding more and more about the story, and it's a fascinating story. So I decided actually to put aside that and focus on this mental health crisis.
You must have been asked this question a million times, but how do we tell the difference between causation and correlation?
Oh, that's very easy. That's what we do in the social sciences. We usually start with correlation just because it's a place to start. There's a lot of data. So we observe over and over again in the studies that the kids who are heavy users, especially girls, have much worse mental health. And then we say, well, that's just correlation. Now let's look for evidence of causation, and that's primarily experiments. So there are a number of different kinds of experiments, but I've collected every experiment I can find. I do all my work in the open, in Google documents. I ask for critique. I put all the experiments I can find on all sides. And we found about 25 true experiments. We use random assignment to put people in some group, get off social media for 3 weeks. And what we find is, I can't remember the exact number, something like 16 out of the 25 do find a significant effect, and none of them find an effect in the reverse direction. That is that kids are harmed by getting off social media. So there is experimental evidence.
And it's important that you stress social media repeatedly, because there are plenty of applications that this technology can be deployed for that may involve hours of screen time that are not negative at all. In fact, they're positive.
Yeah. Well, yes. When I started this journey, this project, I thought the story was going to be social media and girls, because that's where the evidence is strongest. And I didn't know what was going on with the boys, because you can't link social media to harm in boys nearly as well.
Right.
Obviously, right now, in the last few months, we're seeing hundreds, thousands of boys are being sextorted, and some are killing themselves. So, of course, boys can be very, very badly hurt. But at least in these large data sets, we're not seeing that for boys. But the story for boys turns out to be that boys have been basically lured away from any effort in the real world. It's just so much fun. I mean, the multiplayer video games are amazing. The pornography is amazing. Why would you bother going outside and trying to form a team to play football? Why would you bother trying to approach a girl? So the boys are basically, it's screen time, you can call it, but the boys are being lured into the virtual world where they're not doing anything that will turn them into men.
Imagine, if you would, then, an adult who's not a parent or a grandparent who wants you to describe you describe it as a great rewiring of childhood. What is the difference between the pre-wired and the rewired 14-year-old boy?
So I would ask, especially older listeners, to remember what their childhood was like. And almost universally, certainly in your country and mine, it involves being outdoors a lot with your friends. You're hanging out. You're joking around. There's no adult telling you what to do. And this from the age of really about 7 or 8. That used to be the norm in both of our countries. Around 7 or 8 kids are out on their own. Now in both of our countries, the norm is more like 10 or 11. We don't let them out till they're 10 or 11. And then we try to supervise them. So kids need to play, and they need to be self-governing. That is, they need to work out their own problems, face their own risks. That's why we have this long human childhood. In 2010, kids still had that to some extent. We were, restricting it, but they used their technology to text each other, to call each other. They didn't have high-speed internet. They didn't have front-facing cameras. They had flip phones or brick phones. By 2015, everything is different. By 2015, they've traded in their flip phones. They all have smartphones. Most of the girls have Instagram. They have high-speed data. And now, when you put a smartphone in a child's life, it's going to move to the center of their life. It's going to block their face, and everything is going to go through that app. Now even dating goes through that phone. This is, maybe this is an exciting new way to live, we thought. Like, maybe this will be great. And it hasn't been. It's been a complete disaster. Kids need to develop in the real world. They need a lot of time in the real world. They need a lot of time interacting face-to-face with other human beings.
You slightly preempted my next question with that, but there's room for more, which is the long tradition of moral panics.
Let's go there.
Video was supposed to kill the radio star. Grand Theft Auto was supposed to have turned me into a murderous zombie. The amount of hours I spent playing it. Where do you derive your confidence that this is not another glitch, if you like, in developmental evolution?
Sure. So that's a very good counter argument. There have been so many.
It's a question.
Okay, fine. Okay, but it is the main counter argument I get. It is the main argument is people who say, "Oh, this is just another moral panic. We've been through this. Socrates said that writing would destroy memory. Every technology is said to harm you."
Thucydides had a lot to say about the revolting youth as well. So
the revolting youth, yes. So it's a perfectly good hypothesis that this is just one more. But here are some differences. One is, in a traditional moral panic, nothing's really going wrong, but the media runs with a story about a kid who read a comic book and then axe murdered his father. Yeah. And that's why you...
And here's a million kids who also read comic books and didn't axe murder their father. That's not what's happening here.
So in a traditional moral panic, there's a couple of stories that get blown up and they're usually not even true. In this one, everyone sees it in their own children or in their friends' children. This is not like any previous moral panic. Social media is unlike any threat that's ever been there. So that's the first. Second is that in the previous moral panics, the kids didn't agree. The kids were reading comic books and they didn't agree that they were reading them. Or playing video games. Ask kids now about their phone-based life. Ask them now, as one study did at the University of Chicago. They asked college students, do you use Instagram? Do you use TikTok? And then they say, would you prefer to live in a world where TikTok was never invented? The majority, even of kids who use TikTok, the majority said, yes, I wish this never existed. That is not like any previous moral panic.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, really?
It is.
It is. And quite frightening. We've got a strange situation in this country, and it's one of the topics that I return. I should stress that the second half of the anxious generation is prescriptive. It actually does offer solutions, and it does offer ideas, strong ideas, four main ideas as to how this can be addressed, one of which I'd turn you to next, because I take calls from parents whose children fall into the category that you've described, who would much rather not be doing it themselves, and who perhaps were sceptical at first of the extent of the damage being done, the rewiring being undertaken. But there are two parents. There's Philip Russell, the mother of Molly Russell, whose story is well documented. I know you're across it. And there's Esther Jai, who I think you've met on this visit to the UK, whose daughter Brianna was murdered. The latter, Esther has called for one of the things you prescribe in the book, which is phone-free schools, or at least no social media before 16, and brick phones, no smartphones before high school. Philip Russell has argued, not from a position of I don't think philosophy, but from a position of plausibility, that getting that particular genie back into that particular lamp is probably impossible. You think it's possible, not just possible, but essential.
So let me just list the four norms, then we'll focus on the first one. So the key to this whole thing is that we're all stuck in a collective action problem. So if you say to your kid, no, I'm not going to give you a smartphone, and she says, but I'm the only one, I'm left out, I'm cut off. Well, she's right. It's hard to be the only one. So what I'm calling for is social norms so that she's not the only one. And so here are the four norms. Don't give your kid a smartphone before. In America, I say high school. It's cleared out of middle school. Here, 14 is sort of the middle of your secondary school. So the norm emerging here is don't give your kid a smartphone until the end of secondary school. No social media until 16, phone-free schools, and far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. Now let's go back to the first one, keeping kids off of smartphones. It never occurred to me while I was writing the book to recommend a ban on smartphones. That didn't even cross my mind. As an American, we're very wary of the word ban. We have a bit more of a libertarian impulse than you do here. And here, it seems as though Brits, they just run to government like, oh, there's a problem. Government should ban smartphones. Oh, no, maybe they shouldn't ban smartphones. And I'm like, wait a second. I'm calling for norms here. If we're going to do a radical change in society, you don't want to pass laws that will make lots of people into criminals. You want to change norms first. When law comes after norms, it's supported. If law comes before norms, you're going to have a lot of conflict. So my view is, let's just get started. Let's start banning the phones in school. Banning just means you have to put it in a phone locker. Let's give the kids some phone-free time every day. Let's see if that works. And then we'll get people to delay as an individual choice by parents so that no one is the only one who doesn't have a smartphone.
And we had a head teacher actually a couple of weeks ago who just brought in a 12-hour day. He was providing, he already keeps phones in lockers. You're already not allowed to have those, but he, and we must catch up actually and find out how the scheme progressed, but 7 a.m. to 7 p.m, laying on all sorts of extracurricular activities, so the child could almost wean itself off the fear of missing out, or the addiction, or the dopamine, or whatever it is. And I don't want to jinx anything, but as a parent, I've been lucky in this field. But if one of my children displayed the symptoms that you described and was sort of manifesting the problems that you detail and explore and explain in the book, how much help will I get from this book in changing their behaviour, as opposed to societies, or as opposed to the meta? Yeah. How much help would I get for the person?
A lot, because what I tell you in the book is this is very difficult if you do it on your own. The kids are terrified of being cut off. All you have to do is stay in touch with the parents of 2 or 3 of your kids' friends. If you have a small group that's doing it, it's much, much easier. And don't think of this as we have to pull the phones out of their hands. We have to deny them this. Think about it as offering 2 different visions of childhood. You go to your child and you say, look, me and the other parents, we've talked about this. We want you to enjoy your childhood. We want you to have fun and adventure. So, every Friday you guys are going to get together. If you want,
sure.
You can move around, go back and forth. Go to anyone's house. Here's some money. You can go to an amusement park. Go have fun together. But we're only going to give you flip phones. We want you to talk to each other. Gen Z knows that this is messing them up. If you present it that way, most of them will choose a human childhood.
And almost subconsciously or intuitively appreciate that would be preferable, even as they live the opposite. Jonathan Haidt, thank you. The Anxious Generation is out now, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. It's 12:48, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Another book up next. I'm enjoying these Wednesday afternoon forays into the library, but Corinne Fowler, who you may have met before if you listen to my podcast, be talking to us about her new book, Our Island Stories. It's 12:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We were a little distracted earlier by Kemi Badenoch claiming that she knows Rwanda is safe because a friend of hers is on a gap year there at the moment. That's a wonderful metric by which to judge the safety of a country, adjudged, of course, to be unsafe by the internationally recognised authorities. She's also in the news at the moment on the question of slavery not having made much of a contribution to the British economy at all. But we shall set that aside, I think, and turn our attention instead to the latest work from a professor of colonialism and heritage in museum studies at the University of Leicester, who you may know if you've listened to my podcast Full Disclosure, and who was closely allied with that. I mean, for observers, Corinne Fowler, it was an early foray in what was to become the culture wars. You were in the crosshairs of attacks upon the National Trust. And in some ways, your latest book, Our Island Stories, draws together all of these strands. It combines your mission to bring about a better understanding of colonial heritage and colonialism with your love of the natural world. Where did the idea come from?
Well, as you suggested, I love walking and I love history, and I'm interested in colonial history, so it was almost inevitable writing this book. But I think in many ways the book, the way in which it's written, the spirit in which it's written, is a response to the culture war over the National Trust talking about its colonial history and the report that I was involved with, which really came under fire. And there was so much media attention on the upset that the report caused, even talking about it, even raising the subject, that I thought I really need an emotionally intelligent way into this topic, where it's about walking, it's about sort of taking time out, reflecting on how the countryside is connected to the British Empire, but doing it through conversation with walking companions, not shouting,
yes,
not lecturing, nothing like that. It's just a way of understanding how the countryside was transformed.
That's interesting. That I didn't know that. That's why I asked the question. So that's how interviews work. But I didn't realise that. it's a slight recalibration of your approach to the subject then, motivated by your passion for dissemination. You've sort of thought, well, I thought this was uncontroversial when I was involved in a National Trust report that simply detailed historical facts about the relationship between properties and colonialism, or properties and the slave trade. But my goodness me, I seem to ignite all sorts of fury in all sorts of hearts. Perhaps I can find a less... Because I might have gone the other way. I might have thought, well, stuff them. I'm doubling down on my tactics because I'm a historian. I'm a professor. But you thought it's important to find a less febrile way of chasing the same rabbit.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that fascinated me was the kind of questions I was asked, often critical, often hostile, about why I was talking about colonial history. And one of the things that really ignited my idea for this book was, what about labour history? Why don't you talk about labour history? And I thought, well, actually, yes, my school education about colonial history was thin, but so was my school education about working class history and labour history and agricultural unions and things like that. And so I thought, well, what about if I take that question seriously? Rather than saying, oh, this is just trying to shut down the conversation, why don't I write a book and research a book to answer that question? And it was absolutely fascinating how intertwined labour history is with colonial history.
And I mean, the chapter headings do the job of describing where you go and what you do. An Indian walk in the Cotswolds, an enclosure walk in Norfolk and Jamaica, the Bankers' Walk in Hampshire and Louisiana, and as you refer to, the Labourers' Walk in Tolpuddle, but also in the British penal colonies. Some of it people perhaps would be able to get right in a pub quiz, and some of which, of course they wouldn't. So just describe what each chapter is. You set off from... I mean, I can go on these walks. I can go this weekend. And
there are maps in the book, and I've tried to keep the walks nice and short to about 7 miles, because I think most of us don't enjoy walking much more than that. And so the idea is that I researched the history which was relevant to each area, and then design the walk around that history so that you can follow the walk and the history chronologically as you walk through.
Such a brilliant idea, isn't it?
I've got a wool walk in Dolgethlai near Snowdonia, which looks at how the wool produced in that area was used to clothe enslaved people. I've got an enclosure walk, as you've mentioned, on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, which looks at how slave ownership and slavery profits were used to enclose land, to throw people off the commons where they'd been grazing their cattle and their sheep.
Which led to Kett's Rebellion, did it?
Yeah, Kett's Rebellion was before that, but that was an important...
I'm just trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
You do know what you're talking about. And that's what I'm hoping, that it will really make people think, oh, I've heard this. I've never connected it with that. And this is to me, to be honest, even I was surprised, the connections between William Wordsworth and his circle and the East India Company, the fact that he invested in Mississippi bonds. So that's my Lakes Walk. You can do that. It's absolutely beautiful. There's a cotton walk, which shows how the history of cotton manufacture in that area was in East Lancashire, was really affected by the American Civil War, the blockade of the Confederate ports, and the cotton no longer coming into the factories, people then going hungry and having to get poor relief. So I'm really trying to make these sorts of connections.
Really, I mean, it's similar to the project, and I know that Satnam was one of your companions on these walks. It's similar to Satnam's project in Empire Land to just show us how much of the infrastructure is inextricable. It's like trying to take colonialism out of British history is like trying to take the eggs out of a baked cake, Corinne. And what you do here is take us on little tours through the inextricable history of the two phenomena. Because I went to the Museum of the Working People in Manchester and learned about the relationship between the American Revolution and the cotton trade and Cottonopolis. But now I can go and see in real life some of the stuff that I have otherwise only seen in a museum.
Yeah, and the idea is that as well as getting fit and healthy, doing these walks, which is useful, it will also, familiar landscapes will then be seen in revelatory new ways. Yes. So I don't see the countryside the same. I can't, after writing this book, it's been a revelation.
I haven't been on the walks yet, but I can't wait. Our Island Stories by Corinne Fowler is out now. Can I ask you a question, author to author? When you had this idea, did you high-five yourself around the house? Did you go, oh my God, this is one of the best ideas I've ever had. This is absolutely brilliant.
I was just excited to do the walks.
Okay. Too modest to answer the question, because it's an absolutely blindingly brilliant idea, and I'm so glad to see it come to fruition. Corinne Fowler, author of Our Island Stories, Country Walks Through Colonial Britain, is out now. Thank you. It is 12. Sorry, did you?
I love the look that Corinne just gave you when you asked that question. It was sweet.
Right, Sheila Fogarty's here.
Hello.
Oh, hang on. All the business about the catch up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
That interfering busybody, Sheila Fogarty. Thank you very much, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.